Deep in America's wilderness, park rangers stand between civilization and the unknown. Some things that lurk in these forests were never meant to be found. These are their stories. I never thought I'd end up in the most remote corner of Denali National Park, Alaska, living in a ranger outpost cabin that barely qualified as shelter. The structure, weathered gray logs with a slightly pitched roof, sat nestled between ancient spruce trees that creaked and moaned when winter winds blew. My nearest neighbor was 70 miles south. Radio contact was spotty at best. People ask why I chose this isolation. The truth wasn't complicated, but wasn't something I advertised either. After my wife died 3 years ago, the crushing weight of memories in our Seattle apartment became unbearable. Every corner held her ghost. Every room echoed with phantom laughter. I needed somewhere vast and empty, somewhere the pain could dissipate into wilderness, rather than bounce back at me from walls filled with memories. The National Park Service had been desperate for someone to take this posting. Takani Outpost needs an experienced ranger, my supervisor had said, sliding the application across his desk. It's been vacant 18 months. Nobody wants it. Takani, an Athabascan word meaning wilderness guardian, was the perfect escape. The cabin was 12 miles from the nearest access road, with no electricity beyond what my small solar setup could provide. In winter, temperatures routinely dropped to 40 below. Summer brought relentless mosquitoes and the occasional lost hiker. It was perfect. My first 6 months passed uneventfully. I patrolled my sector, documented wildlife sightings, and occasionally guided lost hikers back to civilization. The cabin became home: a small wood stove, a desk beneath the single window, a narrow bed, and shelves lined with field guides and survival manuals. At night, I'd sit on the porch watching the northern lights dance across the sky, feeling smaller than a dust mote in the vastness of the cosmos. That feeling, the humbling insignificance of human existence, was why I stayed. At Takani, I wasn't important enough to have problems worth dwelling on. My grief couldn't compete with the ancient indifference of mountains. The night everything changed began normally enough. Late September had brought the first dusting of snow and temperatures that hovered around freezing. I'd spent the day clearing deadfall from the western trail and returned exhausted to my cabin just as darkness fell. I built a fire in the wood stove, heated a can of beef stew, and was halfway through my dinner when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream. It floated through the trees, lingering just long enough to make me question whether I'd heard anything at all. Setting down my bowl, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The forest was silent now. No wind, no rustling leaves. Just stark black tree trunks against the dim horizon. I swept my light in a slow arc, but saw nothing unusual. "Hello?" I called, immediately feeling foolish. Whatever made that sound wasn't going to answer me. I was about to return inside when movement caught my eye, just a flicker at the edge of my light beam. Something darted between trees about 50 yards away, too quick to identify. Bear? I wondered aloud, though it hadn't moved like any bear I'd ever seen. As I stared into the darkness, an overwhelming sensation crept over me, the certainty I was being watched by something intelligent and malevolent. The hairs on my arms stood straight, and my breath condensed in rapid white puffs before my face. From the shadows came a soft clicking sound, like deer hooves on stone, but rhythmic, almost deliberate. Click, click, click. Then silence. I backed into my cabin, secured the door, and checked my rifle before sitting down. I told myself it was just wildlife, perhaps a wolf or wolverine behaving strangely. But deep down, I knew better. In 15 years as a ranger, I'd encountered nearly every predator native to North America. None had ever made me feel hunted like this. That night I woke repeatedly, certain I'd heard footsteps on my porch. Each time I checked, I found nothing, just moonlight casting tree branch shadows across weathered boards. But the third time there was something new, strange marks in the thin layer of snow. Not animal tracks, not human footprints either. They resembled elongated handprints, with fingers too long and too thin, pressed into the frost, as if something had crawled across my porch on all fours. By morning, they had melted away. But I knew what I'd seen. and it marked the beginning of my nightmare at Takani Outpost. October arrived with a vengeance. Heavy snows buried the trails and winds howled across the mountains. I'd experienced Alaskan winters before, but something about this one felt different, oppressive, watchful. A week after hearing that strange cry, I discovered the first dead animal. I was checking my emergency supply cache half a mile from the cabin when I spotted it. A bull moose, massive and recently deceased. Finding dead wildlife wasn't unusual, but this was different. The carcass hadn't been fed upon by scavengers. Instead, the hide had been partially removed with precision that suggested tools rather than teeth or claws. Most disturbing was the position. The moose had been arranged, legs folded neatly beneath it as if it were merely resting. Around it, the snow had been disturbed in a perfect circle, as though someone had carefully swept the area. I photographed everything and radioed it in. Possible poaching incident, I reported, though I didn't believe that explanation. Poachers take valuable parts, antlers, meat. They don't arrange their kills like macabre art installations. Probably wolves, came the crackling response. Finish documentation and continue regular patrols. That night, the temperature plunged to 30 below. I layered wood in the stove and settled into my chair with a dog-eared copy of Jack London stories, appropriate reading for the environment. Around midnight, as I was drifting off, a sharp rap on my window jerked me awake. I grabbed my flashlight and looked outside. Nothing, just swirling snow and darkness, convincing myself it was just a branch. I returned to my chair. Tap, 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 this time from the rear window. Heart pounding, I snatched my rifle and swept the cabin with my light. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. Silence answered, then a soft scraping along the east wall, like fingernails dragging across wood. It circled the entire cabin, pausing at each corner before continuing. I stood frozen in the center of the room, rifle ready, as the sound completed its circuit and stopped at my door. The handle jiggled slightly, testing, probing, before growing still. Minutes passed. Finally, I summoned the courage to approach the door and check the lock. As I reached for it, a whisper came from the other side, so faint I almost missed it. "Ranger!" Not a word so much as an exhalation. My title stretched into something unnatural. I jerked away, nearly dropping my rifle. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Identify yourself." Nothing, just the wind and my own ragged breathing. I didn't sleep that night. At first light, I examined the cabin's exterior, expecting to find evidence of my nocturnal visitor. The fresh snow revealed nothing except small animal tracks, rabbits and foxes, and my own boot prints from the previous day. But nailed to my door, so small I almost missed it, was a tiny leather pouch sewn with sinew. Inside was a single yellowed tooth, human by the look of it, and a small scrap of paper with one word written in charcoal: leave. I should have heeded that warning, should have packed my gear and hiked out to civilization. But some combination of professional responsibility, stubborn pride, and morbid curiosity kept me at Takani. I convinced myself there was a rational explanation. Perhaps someone trying to scare me off for illegal activities in my jurisdiction. That afternoon, I patrolled the western boundary, an area I hadn't checked in weeks. 3 miles from my cabin, I found something that demolished my rational explanations. A circle of trees, 8 massive spruces, each with a symbol carved into its trunk. The carvings were fresh, the exposed wood still leaking sap despite the cold. The symbols weren't from any alphabet I recognized. Jagged, complex patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked too long. At the center of the circle was a stone cairn topped with the skull of what might have been a wolf, except for the distinctly human teeth set in its upper jaw. I backed away, unable to believe what I was seeing. This was beyond poaching or harassment. This was something ancient and wrong. As I turned to leave, movement caught my eye, a figure watching from between distant trees. Too far to make out details, but something about its outline seemed misshapen, as if its proportions were subtly incorrect. When I blinked, it was gone. That night, the sounds around my cabin intensified, scratching at the walls, whispering at the windows, strange, shuffling footsteps on the roof. And beneath it all, that clicking sound, tick, 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 like bizarre Morse code. I radioed for assistance but received only static in return. The storm had worsened, cutting me off completely. I was alone with whatever circled my cabin, testing its defenses, hunting me with uncanny patience. As October gave way to November, I began to understand I was facing something the Ranger training manual had never covered, something the Athabascan people had feared long before white men arrived in Alaska, something that wore the skins of others and mimicked their voices. November 3rd marked my first direct encounter. The previous night had brought heavy snowfall, transforming the landscape into an endless white expanse. I needed to check the emergency shelter 10 miles northwest, standard procedure after major weather events. The journey took longer than expected. Snowdrifts reached my thighs in places, and visibility remained poor under leaden skies. I reached the shelter, a simple A-frame structure stocked with emergency supplies, around 2 p.m., and found it undisturbed. As I turned to begin the trek home, I noticed footprints approaching from the north, human footprints, but with an odd gait, as if the person walked with one foot turned backward. They led directly to the shelter door. Something cold settled in my stomach. Those tracks hadn't been there when I arrived. "Hello?" I called, scanning the surrounding forest. "Park Service, identify yourself," the wind answered, carrying with it a scent I recognized instantly, the sweet sour stench of rotting meat. Movement flashed in my peripheral vision. I spun, raising my rifle, and saw it, just for a moment, before it ducked behind a massive spruce. A person, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. It wore what looked like animal hides stitched together, and though I glimpsed its face for only a second, the image burned into my memory. Gaunt, gray-skinned, with eyes like black pits, and a mouth stretched impossibly wide, lined with jagged teeth. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice embarrassingly thin in the vast silence. I circled the tree, rifle ready, but found nothing, just more of those strange tracks leading deeper into the forest. The rational part of my mind offered explanations: stress, isolation, light playing tricks through the trees. But I knew what I'd seen. Something not quite human, not quite animal, watching me with predatory intelligence. Abandoning standard procedure, I began hurrying back toward my cabin, constantly checking over my shoulder. The short Arctic day was already fading, and I had no desire to be caught in darkness. Halfway home I heard it, that same uncanny cry that had started everything, now closer, more distinct. It mimicked a human voice with unsettling accuracy, calling out in what sounded like pain or distress. "Help me, please, somebody." The voice sounded female, young, terrified. Every ranger instinct told me to investigate, to render aid. But deeper instincts, older, primal ones, screamed warnings. "Hello?" I called back cautiously. "Park Service, what's your location?" "Over here." The voice shifted direction, now coming from behind me. "I'm hurt, please." I stood motionless, remembering stories told by native guides during my training years. Stories about creatures that lured travelers by mimicking loved ones, or people in distress. "Identify yourself," I demanded, aiming my rifle toward the voice. A pause, then, "It's me. Don't you recognize me?" The voice changed, transforming mid-sentence into one that made my heart stutter. My wife's voice, perfectly replicated despite being 3 years in her grave. Something inside me broke. I fired a warning shot into the air and ran, abandoning all pretense of bravery. Behind me, the thing wearing my wife's voice laughed, a sound that began humanly enough but deteriorated into something that resembled radio static punctuated by those clicking noises. I reached my cabin as darkness fell, locked the door, and barricaded it with my desk. Outside, something circled continuously, occasionally scratching at the walls or tapping at windows. Through the night, it cycled through voices. My wife, my former supervisor, lost hikers I'd rescued years ago, each calling to me, asking to be let in. How did it know those voices? How could it possibly know? Around 3 a.m., exhausted and half-mad with fear, I peered through a window and saw it clearly for the first time. The creature stood at the edge of my clearing, illuminated by moonlight reflecting off snow. 7 feet tall at least, impossibly thin, with jointed limbs that bent backward and forward with equal ease. Its body was covered in what appeared to be animal hides, stitched directly into its gray flesh. But its face, God, its face, mostly human in structure but wrong in every detail. The proportions were distorted, the features asymmetrical. Its eyes reflected moonlight like an animal's, and its mouth opened far wider than any human mouth could, revealing rows of mismatched teeth that appeared to belong to different species. It saw me watching and smiled, a horrible stretching of lips that extended nearly to its ears. Then it began to change. Its body contorted, bones visibly shifting beneath its skin. Limbs shortened, torso widened. Within minutes it had taken a new form, a crude approximation of my own appearance, like looking into a warped mirror. My doppelganger stood watching me, head tilted at an impossible angle, before raising a hand in mocking greeting. Then it slipped back into the forest, leaving me trembling before the window. By morning, I was running a fever, my mind spinning with fear and confusion. I tried the radio repeatedly but received only bursts of static interspersed with what sounded like distant laughter. In my feverish state, I remembered accounts I'd read years ago in the ranger station archives, reports dating back to the 1920s describing similar phenomena. Mysterious deaths, disappearances, rangers driven to madness or suicide. All from this region, all during winter months, all officially attributed to the harsh conditions and isolation. One report in particular had stuck with me, written by a ranger named Joseph Blackwater, himself half Athabascan. He documented similar encounters before disappearing during a patrol. His final report contained a native word I now recalled, with chilling clarity: Skinwalker. The fever broke after 2 days, leaving me weak but clear-headed enough to formulate a plan. If I was facing what I thought, a skinwalker from Native American lore, I needed information beyond my own limited knowledge. My cabin contained a small collection of books on Alaskan wildlife and geography, but nothing on indigenous legends. However, buried in my emergency supplies was something potentially more valuable: a satellite phone reserved for genuine crises. Park Service regulations strictly limited its use due to the expense, but I decided my situation qualified. With shaking hands, I dialed the number of Dr. Michael Redfeather, an anthropologist I'd met years ago during cultural sensitivity training. Specialized in Athabascan folklore, he'd given me his contact information after we'd bonded over shared wilderness experiences. I hadn't spoken to him since. The connection was poor, but his voice came through clearly enough. Redfeather speaking. Dr. Redfeather, this is Ranger. I caught myself before giving my name. Something instinctual warned me against it. We met during training in Anchorage about 5 years back. I'm stationed at Takani Outpost. A pause. Yes, I remember you. Unusual to receive a call from there. What can I do for you? I hesitated, aware of how my situation would sound to an academic. I need information about skinwalkers, specifically in Athabascan tradition. The silence that followed was so long I thought we'd lost connection. Finally, that's not a casual research topic. Why are you asking? Please, I said, abandoning pretense. I'm experiencing something I can't explain. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Another pause, then his voice returned, lower, more urgent. Listen carefully. What you're calling a skinwalker is known by many names among northern indigenous peoples. The Athabascans call it Ngloshi, he who walks on all fours. Not a spirit, but a physical being, once human, transformed through forbidden rituals. What does it want? I asked. To feed primarily, physically and spiritually. They consume flesh but also fear, suffering. They're drawn to isolation, to vulnerability. His voice dropped further. Is there something there with you? Something mimicking voices, leaving arranged kills? My blood went cold. How did you know? Because Takani isn't just a random outpost. That location has history, a dark one. The name doesn't mean wilderness guardian as you were told. In Old Athabascan it translates closer to boundary place or threshold between worlds. The revelation hit me like physical blow. The Park Service built an outpost on sacred ground. Worse than sacred, Redfeather replied. On a wound. There was a massacre there in 1898. Miners killed an entire Athabascan village after gold was discovered nearby. The elders performed forbidden rituals before they died, calling something ancient to avenge them, something that never left. I watched shadows lengthen outside my window as Redfeather continued, detailing the creature's reported abilities: mimicry, shape-shifting, supernatural tracking skills. Most disturbing was its intelligence, not animal cunning, but calculated malevolence. "How do I fight it?" I asked finally. His hesitation was answer enough, but he replied anyway. "Traditionally, you don't, you leave. The boundary of its territory is typically marked somehow: symbols, arranged stones, modified trees. If you find that boundary, cross it. It won't follow beyond its domain. And if leaving isn't an option, there are stories of Nagloshi being killed, but the methods—" He trailed off. "Let's just say they're specific and require preparation you likely don't have. Your best chance is to reach the boundary." I thought of the circle of carved trees I'd found. What does this boundary look like? It varies, but typically it's a natural feature, a river, a distinct change in terrain, something that represents transition. I knew immediately what it must be: Devil's Pass, a narrow canyon 5 miles east that marked the official edge of my patrol zone. Beyond it, the terrain dropped rapidly toward more populated areas. "One last question," I said. "Why me? Why now? If this thing has been here since 1898, why haven't all rangers experienced this?" Redfeather's voice became somber. "The lore suggests they're drawn to emotional wounds, to grief and isolation. Negative energy sustains them." A pause. "Are you carrying something like that?" My wife's face flashed in my mind. "Yes." "Then that's your answer. It sensed your pain from the moment you arrived. It's been watching you, learning you, preparing." Static began to overtake the connection. "Get to the boundary. Don't look back. Don't respond to voices, no matter what you hear." His final words were broken by interference. "And Ranger, it knows your name now. Don't—" The connection died. I stared at the dead phone, a new level of dread settling over me. It knows your name. Of course it did. It had been studying me for months, learning my habits, my weaknesses, my grief. That night, the creature returned with new tactics. It no longer circled aimlessly, but concentrated its attention on my door, scratching, whispering, occasionally throwing its weight against the frame hard enough to make the hinges creak. "Let me in," it said in my wife's voice. "I'm so cold out here. Please, I miss you." I covered my ears, reciting park regulations to myself like a mantra, focusing on anything but that perfect simulation of her voice. Dawn brought silence but no relief. Outside, in the fresh snow, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Dozens of sets of tracks surrounding my cabin, all different: bear prints, wolf tracks, moose hoof prints, and human footprints of various sizes, as if a crowd had gathered overnight. But I knew the truth: one creature, many forms. It was showing me what it could do, taunting me with its abilities. I had 5 days' worth of supplies left. The next scheduled radio check was in 10 days. No one would miss me until then. My decision was made. Tomorrow, I would attempt to reach Devil's Pass. Chapter 5, The Pursuit. I awoke before dawn on November 8th, my mind clear despite minimal sleep. If I was going to attempt an escape to Devil's Pass, preparation would be crucial. The route involved crossing 5 miles of increasingly mountainous terrain in sub-zero temperatures with deep snow. Under normal circumstances, a challenging half-day hike, with a supernatural predator in pursuit, potentially fatal. I packed methodically: emergency rations, first aid kit, extra ammunition, fire-starting supplies, and emergency blanket. I dressed in layers: thermal underwear, wool pants, flannel shirt, down jacket, and outer weatherproof shell. My satellite phone went into an inner pocket, along with my compass and map. As I prepared, I considered my options for dealing with the Skinwalker. Conventional weapons seemed unlikely to be effective based on Redfeather's warnings, but I brought my rifle anyway. If nothing else, it might slow the creature down. The sky was still dark when I stepped outside, rifle ready, scanning for movement. The air was eerily still, the temperature hovering around 15 below. My breath crystallized instantly, forming a white cloud that lingered before dissipating. The forest appeared empty, peaceful even under its blanket of snow. No tracks surrounded my cabin today, no signs of my nocturnal visitor. That worried me more than any overt threat would have. The creature was changing tactics again. I began moving eastward, establishing a steady pace that would conserve energy while covering ground efficiently. The route to Devil's Pass followed a natural valley before rising sharply into the mountains, with the pass itself a narrow slash between two peaks. The first mile passed uneventfully, the crunch of snow beneath my boots the only sound breaking the silence. I maintained vigilance, constantly checking behind and around me, but saw nothing unusual. As dawn finally broke, casting long blue shadows across the snow, I heard it. The first indication I wasn't alone. A branch snapping far off to my right, too deliberate to be natural, too loud to be small wildlife. I kept moving, resisting the urge to run. Running would waste energy I couldn't afford to lose, and the deep snow would make it futile anyway. Instead, I maintained my pace while readying my rifle. The second sign came 20 minutes later. Tracks appearing in the snow ahead of me, fresh tracks that hadn't been there moments before, as if something had circled around and deliberately placed them in my path. Human footprints, but with that same wrong gait, one foot turned completely backward. My heart rate increased, but I pressed on, deviating slightly from my planned route to avoid following directly in those unnatural tracks. By mid-morning, the sun had risen fully, casting brilliant light across the snow-covered landscape. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated the beauty, the way sunlight transformed ordinary trees into crystalline sculptures, how shadows painted blue patterns across untouched snow. Today, the brightness only heightened my anxiety, creating sharp contrasts where anything might hide. 3 miles in, I began the ascent toward the pass. The terrain steepened considerably, forcing me to pause frequently to catch my breath. During one such pause, I heard it clearly, my wife's voice, calling from somewhere behind me. "Why are you leaving me? Don't you love me anymore?" I clenched my teeth and continued climbing, remembering Redfeather's warning not to respond, no matter what I heard. The voice changed, becoming more desperate. "Please, I'm hurt. I need help." Then my father's voice. "Son, is that you? I've been lost out here for days." Each voice was perfect, flawless in its replication, hitting emotional triggers with uncanny precision. I forced myself to keep moving, though each step became increasingly difficult as the slope grew steeper and the snow deeper. Halfway up the incline to the pass, I glanced back and saw it, a figure standing at the base of the slope watching me, too distant to make out details, but its unnatural stillness marked it as inhuman. It raised one elongated arm in greeting, then began to ascend after me, moving with a fluid grace that defied the difficult terrain. Panic surged through me. I increased my pace, struggling through snow that now reached mid-thigh in places. My breath came in painful gasps, the cold air burning my lungs. The pass was visible now, perhaps half a mile ahead, a narrow cut between rocky outcroppings, beyond which lay safety if Redfeather's information was correct. Behind me, the creature closed the distance with inhuman speed, moving through deep snow as if it weighed nothing. I could hear it now, not footsteps, but that bizarre clicking sound growing louder. A fallen tree blocked my path, its massive trunk half buried in snow. As I clambered over it, my foot slipped and I fell heavily, my rifle discharging accidentally into the snow. I scrambled to my feet, retrieved the weapon, and continued, but the delay cost precious seconds. When I next looked back, the creature was less than 100 yards behind, close enough to see clearly for the first time in daylight. It had abandoned human pretense now, moving on all fours like some nightmarish spider, its limbs bending in impossible ways. The patchwork of skins covering its body fluttered in the wind, revealing glimpses of gray, mottled flesh beneath. Its face shifted continuously, features flowing like wax, sometimes approximating humanity before melting into something wholly alien. The only constants were those eyes, black, depthless, fixed on me with predatory intensity. "You can't outrun me, Ranger," it called, using my own voice now. "This has been my territory for centuries. I know every inch of it." I fired a shot in its direction, not expecting to hit it, but hoping to slow its advance. The creature didn't even flinch as the bullet passed through where its shoulder should have been, leaving no visible damage. The pass loomed ahead, now just a quarter mile away, I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my muscles and lungs. The creature matched my increased pace effortlessly, continuing to close the distance between us. "I'll wear your skin next," it called, its voice distorting into something that barely resembled speech. "Feel your memories, become you." 70 yards, 60. The clicking sound grew louder, almost deafening now, like bone striking bone in rapid succession. The entrance to the pass was marked by two tall rock formations, creating a natural gateway. As I approached, I noticed symbols carved into their surfaces, similar to those I'd seen on the trees, but older, weathered by decades of exposure, the boundary markers. This was it, the territory's edge. 50 yards from the pass, my foot plunged through a hidden pocket in the snow, pitching me forward. I landed hard, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. As I struggled to rise, rifle lost somewhere in the deep snow, I heard the creature behind me, too close now, much too close. "No escape," it hissed, now only yards away. "You're mine." I abandoned my pack, crawled forward on hands and knees, then forced myself upright for a final desperate sprint toward the pass. The creature's breathing was audible now, a raspy, wet sound unlike anything living. 20 yards, 10. The shadow of the pass fell over me as I crossed between the stone markers, feeling a subtle shift in the air, like passing through an invisible curtain. Behind me, an inhuman shriek of rage echoed across the mountains, a sound of such primal fury that birds took flight from distant trees. I risked a glance back. The creature had stopped at the entrance to the pass, its body contorting with apparent pain or anger. It paced back and forth before the invisible line, testing it like a caged animal, but came no further. The boundary was real. It couldn't cross. I collapsed into the snow, lungs burning, watching as the Skinwalker raged at the edge of its territory. After several minutes of this display, it grew still, staring at me with those bottomless eyes. "I'll be waiting," it said in my wife's voice, gentle now, almost sad. "When grief brings you back to my territory, they always return eventually." Then it turned and loped away, its unnatural form quickly disappearing among the trees below. I remained there, shaking with exhaustion and lingering terror, until I was certain it was truly gone. Then I continued through the pass, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Takani outpost. That night, huddled in an emergency shelter on the other side of the mountains, I used the satellite phone to call for extraction, citing medical emergency. I was retrieved the following day by helicopter and transported to Anchorage, where I submitted my resignation from the Park Service immediately. 6 months have passed since I fled Takani outpost. Spring has arrived in the lower 48, where I've settled in a small Montana town far from Alaska's wilderness. I've found work as a wilderness guide, daytime excursions only, always returning to civilization before dark. The Park Service never questioned my abrupt resignation. When I described finding strange symbols carved in trees and rocks, they dispatched a team to investigate potential vandalism. The official report concluded that environmental activists were likely responsible, protesting planned expansions of tourist facilities in the area. No mention was made of my other claims. My supervisor suggested, kindly but firmly, that isolation and grief had affected my judgment. I didn't argue. Dr. Redfeather remains the only person who believed my account. We've spoken several times since my escape, his academic interest in my experience tempered by genuine concern for my well-being. He's documented my story alongside historical records of similar encounters, building what he calls a pattern of evidence for phenomena outside conventional understanding. I've tried to move forward, to rebuild some semblance of normal life, but normalcy proves elusive. I still wake from nightmares where I'm being pursued through endless snowy forests by something wearing my wife's face. The clicking sound haunts me. I hear it in ordinary noises, typing keyboards, cooking timers, turn signals in traffic. Worst are the moments when I catch movement in my peripheral vision, a tall, thin figure standing just out of sight, gone when I turn to look. Hallucinations, my therapist assures me. Post-traumatic stress manifesting visually. I accept this explanation during daylight hours. Last week I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small leather pouch identical to the one I'd found nailed to my cabin door. It contained a single yellowed tooth and a note bearing one word, waiting. The postmark indicated it had been mailed from Denali Station, Alaska. I burned it immediately and spent the night with every light in my apartment blazing, jumping at shadows and imagining clicking sounds in the pipes. Dr. Redfeather tells me I'm safe as long as I stay away from Takani. The creature is bound to its territory by whatever ancient forces created it. It cannot follow me here physically, but in my darkest moments, I wonder if that's entirely true. Some boundaries are physical, rivers, mountain passes, carved symbols in stone. Others exist in the mind, in the heart, in memory. My grief brought me to Takani initially, made me vulnerable to what waited there. That grief remains, transformed but not diminished. Some nights I find myself longing for the vast Alaskan wilderness, for the solitude that once brought peace before it brought terror. In those moments I feel a pull northward, subtle but persistent, like a distant voice calling me home. I've taken precautions against my weaker self. My therapist holds a sealed letter containing my story and instructions to contact Dr. Redfeather should I suddenly decide to return to Alaska. My employer has strict orders never to assign me to northern expeditions, regardless of what reasons I might give for wanting them. Yet the creature's final words haunt me. They always return eventually. I understand now why Takani Outpost had remained vacant for 18 months before my arrival. I understand the high turnover rate among rangers assigned there, the disappearances officially attributed to wildlife attacks or exposure. The Park Service maintains the outpost, repaired, restocked, always ready for the next caretaker. I wonder how many have encountered what I did, how many escaped, how many returned, drawn back by forces they couldn't explain even to themselves. Sometimes I imagine my replacement arriving at that weathered cabin, unpacking supplies, settling in for their first night alone in the wilderness. Do they hear the clicking sound outside their window? Do they feel watched from the moment they arrive? I should warn them somehow, but who would believe me? Instead, I focus on rebuilding my life day by day, minute by minute. I surround myself with people, with noise, with light, anything to keep the shadows at bay. I avoid looking too long into dark corners or empty doorways. And I never, ever answer when I hear familiar voices calling my name after dark. But some nights, when the wind blows a certain way, I find myself standing at my window, looking northward. In those moments, I feel something reaching across the miles between us, patient, ancient, hungry, waiting for me to come home. I used to think trucking was a good way to keep to myself. I'm not the type of guy who likes chit-chat, never saw the point in wasting words on strangers. Call it stoicism, maybe just a strong sense of self-reliance. Whatever it is, driving a truck suited me. Long hours, quiet nights, and nobody asking questions. But one night on a narrow stretch of road outside this small, off-the-map place called Logan's Gap, all that changed, and not in the way you'd expect. My name's Jack. 15 years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler, and I've seen most of what America has to offer through a windshield. The endless plains of Nebraska, the jagged peaks of the Rockies, desert highways that shimmer like water in the distance. I've watched lightning storms illuminate entire valleys in fog so thick you could cut it with a knife, but nothing prepared me for what I found in Logan's Gap. I had picked up a load of lumber in Montana, hauling it down to a warehouse in New Mexico. Standard run, nothing special. The kind of job I could do with my eyes closed, though I never would. That's how accidents happen. That's how people die. 4 days on the road had left me bleary-eyed. I knew it wasn't safe to keep going without some rest. The last thing I wanted was to end up another statistic, another cross on the highway where some poor bastard fell asleep at the wheel. I kept an eye out for somewhere to stop, checking my GPS occasionally, though reception was spotty in this part of the country. The sign for Logan's Gap appeared suddenly, illuminated briefly by my headlights. Population 347, just a speck on the map, the kind of place most people drive through without noticing. Something about the sign caught my attention. The paint was fresh, numbers clear and sharp, while everything else around it seemed weathered and ancient. I flicked on my turn signal, deciding to pull off the highway. The exit ramp curved sharply, taking me down a single-lane road lined with tall pines that seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel of darkness. My headlights cut through, but just barely, like they were being swallowed by the night. The trees gave way to scattered buildings, most of them dark. A few houses with porch lights glowing weakly. A diner with a closed sign hanging crookedly in the window. I spotted the gas station at the edge of town, its fluorescent lights humming under a metal awning, the only place showing signs of life at this hour. The digital clock on my dashboard read 1:37 a.m. as I pulled into the lot, the gravel crunching under my tires. I parked near the pumps, killed the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. The quiet was absolute, oppressive even. No insects chirping, no distant traffic noise, just stillness. Stretching my legs after hours of sitting felt like heaven. I cracked my neck, back, and knuckles, trying to work out the stiffness before heading inside. The bell above the door gave a weak jingle as I entered. The inside of the station was like any other I'd seen. Shelves of snacks, coolers full of drinks, cigarettes behind the counter. But the place had a staleness to it, like the air hadn't moved in years. A thin layer of dust seemed to coat everything, despite the open sign in the window. A man stood behind the counter, hunched over a tattered paperback. He was scrawny, with skin that hung loose on his frame, like he'd recently lost weight. His hair was greasy, pressed flat against his scalp. When he looked up, his eyes were watery and bloodshot. His name tag read Max. "Evening," I said, nodding in his direction. Max stared at me for a moment too long before responding. "Need gas?" His voice was flat, emotionless, just looking for directions. "Is there a rest stop nearby where I can park my rig for a few hours? Need to catch some shut-eye." His eyes flicked over me, then past me, focusing on something that wasn't there. "Highway 49, about 10 miles east. Take the third exit near mile marker 47. The words came out mechanical, rehearsed. I felt a chill at the base of my spine. Something about Max's demeanor set off warning bells in my head. But I'd met plenty of strange people in my time on the road. Some folks just aren't wired for social niceties. "Thanks," I said, grabbing a coffee from the pot that had probably been sitting there since noon. I set a few bills on the counter. Max didn't move to take them, just kept staring past me, his eyes unfocused. "Be careful out there," he said suddenly as I turned to leave. "Sometimes people go to that rest stop and don't come back." I paused, coffee halfway to my lips. What's that supposed to mean? But Max had returned to his book, apparently done with the conversation. I stood there for a moment, contemplating whether to push for an explanation, but decided against it. Probably just trying to spook the out-of-towner, I figured. Small-town entertainment. As I pushed open the door to leave, I glanced back. Max was watching me now, his expression unreadable. Our eyes met, and I could have sworn I saw something like pity in his gaze. The bell jingled as the door closed behind me. Back in my truck, I considered finding somewhere else to rest. Max's warning, if that's what it was, had left me unsettled. But I was dead tired, and the thought of driving another hour to the next town seemed impossible. I'd check out this rest stop. If it looked sketchy, I'd move on. I pulled back onto the main road, the town disappearing in my rearview mirror. The trees closed in again, their branches creating strange, shifting shadows across the pavement. My high beams didn't seem to penetrate the darkness as well as they should have. The highway was deserted when I merged back onto it, not another vehicle in sight. I kept an eye out for mile marker 47, sipping the bitter coffee that did little to clear the fog of exhaustion. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a black ribbon under a moonless sky. 10 minutes into the drive, I began to wonder if I'd missed the exit. I should have reached it by now. Just as the thought crossed my mind, I spotted the sign, Rest Area, 1 mile. The lettering was faded, barely visible in my headlights. Relief washed over me. Soon I'd be able to close my eyes and get the rest I desperately needed. But as I took the exit, a nagging sense of unease followed me. Max's warning echoed in my mind. Sometimes people go to that rest stop and don't come back. The rest area wasn't much to look at. A gravel lot with a few picnic tables scattered around. Two vending machines standing side by side under a small shelter, and a cinder block bathroom building that had seen better days. A single light pole illuminated the center of the lot, creating a small island of visibility in the surrounding darkness. I found a spot at the far end, away from the light, where I could sleep without its glare coming through my windshield. I backed the truck in, habit from years on the road. Always position yourself for a quick exit. As I cut the engine, silence descended like a physical weight. No traffic noise, no distant sounds of civilization, just nothing. I climbed out, needing to stretch my legs one more time before turning in for the night. The air had a sharp coldness to it, clearer than it had been in town. Stars punctured the black velvet sky above, scattered like salt across a dark tablecloth. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. The crunch of gravel underfoot seemed impossibly loud as I walked toward the vending machines. I wasn't hungry, but it gave me something to do, a reason to move around before being confined to my sleeper cab for the next few hours. The machines hummed softly as I approached, their pale blue light casting strange shadows. One sold snacks, the other drinks. Both looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a functioning rest stop. I dug in my pocket for change, fed $1 into the snack machine, and pressed the buttons for a package of peanuts. The metal coil turned slowly, pushing the package toward the edge. It teetered there for a moment before falling with a thud into the collection bin. As I bent to retrieve it, a sound reached me, faint but distinct. Footsteps on gravel, coming from somewhere behind me. I straightened quickly, turning toward the source of the noise. The rest area appeared empty, just as it had been when I arrived. My truck sat where I'd left it, a hulking shadow against the tree line. Nothing moved. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the night air. No response, just the soft electrical hum of the vending machines and the distant rustle of leaves. I must have imagined it, I told myself, fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I pocketed the peanuts and started back toward my truck, walking a little faster than before. The footsteps came again, clearer this time. A slow, dragging sound, like someone shuffling rather than walking properly, and closer, much closer than before. I spun around, heart suddenly hammering in my chest. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing. Just the empty lot stretching before me, half lit by the single light pole. I wasn't imagining things. I knew what I'd heard. Someone was there, watching me, hiding just beyond the reach of the light. I backed toward my truck, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. I reached the driver's side door and fumbled for my keys, suddenly desperate to be inside the relative safety of my cab. As I unlocked the door, movement caught my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness near the bathroom building. A man stepped into the dim light. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with a gaunt frame that made him appear even taller. He wore clothes that seemed from another time, a long, dark coat that reached past his knees, frayed at the edges, and pants that were too short, revealing pale ankles above scuffed boots. A wide-brimmed hat sat atop his head, casting his face in shadow. He stood perfectly still, about 30 feet away, facing me directly. There was something profoundly wrong about the way he held himself, too rigid, like a mannequin rather than a living person. "Can I help you?" I called out, one hand on the door handle, ready to dive inside if necessary. The man didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, staring in my direction. "Look, buddy, I don't want any trouble," I said, louder this time. "Just passing through, looking for some rest." For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the man tilted his head to one side. The movement was unnatural, mechanical, like his neck was on a hinge. The angle was too severe, beyond what a normal neck should allow. A jolt of fear shot through me. This wasn't right. None of this was right. "I'm leaving," I said, opening the truck door. "You have a good night." The man took a step forward, then another. His movements were jerky, disjointed. Not the smooth motion of a normal human being, but something else entirely, like a puppet controlled by an unskilled hand. I climbed into the cab and slammed the door, fumbling with the keys. Through the windshield, I could see him approaching, that same awkward gait, closing the distance between us with surprising speed, despite the stiffness of his movements. The engine roared to life, and I threw the truck into reverse, ready to peel out of there. But something made me hesitate, a flicker of movement to my right. I turned my head just in time to see the man appear at my passenger window. It was impossible. He'd been in front of the truck just seconds before. No one could move that quickly, could they? Now, with his face level with my window, I could see him clearly for the first time. His skin was gray, not the pallor of illness, but the actual color of stone. His eyes were black pits, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it, and his mouth, a lipless slash across the lower half of his face, was fixed in what might have been a smile. I hit the gas, the truck lurching backward. In the side mirror, I saw him standing where I'd been parked, watching as I maneuvered onto the access road. He didn't give chase, didn't run after me, just stood perfectly still again, his head cocked at that impossible angle. I shifted into drive and floored it, the engine protesting as I accelerated onto the highway. My hands shook on the steering wheel, cold sweat beading on my forehead. What the hell had I just seen? 5 miles down the road, I pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking as I tried to calm my racing heart. I needed to make sense of what had happened. The man's appearance, his movements, the way he'd somehow gotten from the front of my truck to the side in the blink of an eye. None of it was possible. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Maybe this was all some vivid hallucination brought on by exhaustion. I pinched my arm hard, the pain sharp and immediate. No, I was awake. This was real. I considered calling the police but quickly dismissed the idea. What would I tell them? That I'd been scared off by a strange man at a rest stop? That wasn't a crime. And how would I explain the things I'd seen? The things that defied explanation? The rational part of my brain tried to piece together a logical explanation. The man was probably just some local weirdo who got his kicks scaring travelers. The odd movements, the unnatural speed, those were tricks of the light, misperceptions caused by fatigue and fear. But deep down, I knew better. What I'd seen wasn't human, couldn't be human. I pulled back onto the highway, determined to put as much distance between myself and Logan's Gap as possible. Sleep would have to wait. I'd drive through the night if necessary, find somewhere populated, well-lit, and safe to rest. As I drove, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see the strange figure standing in the middle of the road behind me. But there was nothing, just empty highway stretching into darkness. An hour later, I spotted signs for a larger town ahead. Riverside, population 12,000. The lights of a truck stop near the highway exit beckoned like a lighthouse to a ship lost at sea. I pulled in, parking under the brightest lights I could find, and cut the engine. My hands were still trembling. I reached for my thermos, took a swig of cold coffee, and tried to steady my nerves. The truck stop was busy, even at this late hour. Other rigs parked in neat rows, drivers moving between the convenience store and their vehicles. Normal people. Safe. As my adrenaline ebbed, exhaustion crashed over me in waves. I locked the doors, crawled into my sleeper berth, and pulled the curtain closed. Despite my fatigue, sleep seemed impossible now. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure with his tilted head and stone-gray skin. Eventually, sheer exhaustion won out. My last conscious thought was of Max at the gas station, his warning suddenly making perfect, terrible sense. Sometimes people go to that rest stop and don't come back. I woke with a jolt, for a moment not remembering where I was. Sunlight streamed through the windows of my cab, harsh and bright. The digital clock on my dashboard read 10:23 a.m. I'd slept for almost 6 hours, longer than I'd intended. The truck stop was busy with morning activity. Families on road trips stretching their legs, truckers chatting over cigarettes, the smell of diesel and fast food hanging in the air. Normal, safe. The events of the previous night seemed distant now, dreamlike in the harsh light of day. But the memory remained vivid, that strange figure with his unnatural movements and expressionless face. I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of it all. Had I really seen what I thought I saw, or had exhaustion warped my perception? I climbed out of the cab, legs stiff from sleep, and headed toward the truck stop's diner. Food and coffee would help clear my head. Maybe in daylight, with a full stomach, I could rationalize what had happened at the rest area outside Logan's Gap. The diner was half full, mostly truckers and a few local workers grabbing late breakfasts. I slid into a booth by the window, ordering coffee and the breakfast special from a waitress whose name tag read Betty. "Passing through or heading home?" she asked, refilling my cup after I'd drained it in 3 long gulps. "Just passing through, hauling lumber down to New Mexico." "Long drive," she said. "You look like you've seen better nights. Everything okay?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell someone about what had happened, to verify that I wasn't losing my mind. But what would I say? That I'd been stalked by some inhuman entity at a rest stop? "Just tired," I said instead. "Didn't get much rest last night." Betty nodded sympathetically. "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you need to recharge. We don't mind truckers taking up space if they're ordering." I thanked her and turned my attention to the plate of eggs, bacon, and toast she set before me. As I ate, I tried to think rationally about the previous night. The strange man must have been a local with mental health issues, the unnatural movements, the impossibly quick relocation from one side of my truck to the other. Those were tricks of perception, nothing more. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd experienced went beyond simple explanation. The cold dread I'd felt in that man's presence was like nothing I'd ever known. It had been primal, instinctual, the kind of fear that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to something ancient within us. My food lost its taste as these thoughts churned in my mind. I pushed the half-eaten plate away and paid the bill, leaving Betty a generous tip. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, bathing the truck stop in warm light. I stood for a moment, letting the heat seep into my bones, driving away the lingering chill that seemed to have settled there. I had a schedule to keep. The lumber needed to be in New Mexico by tomorrow afternoon. I couldn't afford to waste more time dwelling on what had happened. With a deep breath, I climbed back into my truck and started the engine. As I pulled onto the highway, I made a decision. I wouldn't take the same route back after making my delivery. I'd find another way, even if it meant adding hours to my return journey. I wasn't going anywhere near Logan's Gap again. The day passed uneventfully. Mile after mile of highway slipped beneath my wheels as I put distance between myself and the events of the previous night. With each passing hour, my unease diminished, replaced by a sense of detachment. By mid-afternoon, I had almost convinced myself that nothing extraordinary had happened at all. Almost. Around 4 p.m., I stopped for fuel at a large truck plaza just across the state line. As I stood watching the numbers tick upward on the pump, a local news broadcast caught my attention from a small television mounted above the payment counter. "And authorities are asking for any information regarding the disappearance of local man Maxwell Reed, last seen working the night shift at a gas station in Logan's Gap." My blood turned cold. The photo on the screen was grainy but unmistakable. Max, the gas station attendant, who had warned me about the rest stop. I abandoned the pump and moved closer to the TV, straining to hear the rest of the report. Reed was reported missing when he failed to return home after his shift. His car was found in the gas station parking lot, but there was no sign of Reed himself. Security footage shows him leaving the station shortly after 2 a.m., but after that, his whereabouts are unknown. Anyone with information is asked to contact local authorities. The report moved on to other news, but I stood frozen, my mind racing. Max had disappeared the same night I'd met him, shortly after I'd left the gas station. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Had he followed me to the rest stop? Had he encountered the same strange figure I had? Or was there some other connection I was missing? I finished refueling mechanically, my thoughts elsewhere. As I climbed back into my truck, a new fear took hold, not for myself, but for Max. If what I'd seen at the rest stop was real, if that thing was real, then Max might be to Max and his cryptic warning. The pieces were connected somehow, forming a picture I couldn't yet see clearly. As darkness fell once again, the cab of my truck seemed to shrink around me. The night pressed against the windows, deeper and more impenetrable than usual. I turned up the radio, trying to drown out my thoughts with country music and talk shows. Around midnight, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. They'd been there for at least 20 miles, maintaining the same distance behind me. Not unusual on a highway, but something about their steady presence made me uneasy. I changed lanes. The headlights followed. I increased my speed slightly. The headlights matched my pace. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Coincidence, I told myself. Just another traveler heading in the same direction. But after another 10 miles of the same, I decided to test my theory. At the next exit, I put on my turn signal and pulled off the highway. The headlights followed. Now, on a smaller 2-lane road, the vehicle behind me was closer. Through my mirrors, I could see it was a dark sedan, its make and model obscured by the night. I made another turn, then another, moving onto progressively smaller roads away from the highway. Still, the sedan followed, never falling behind, never gaining ground, maintaining that same eerie, perfect distance. My heart rate quickened. This was no coincidence. Someone was following me, tracking my movements with purposeful intent. But who? And why? I came to a stop at a crossroads, empty fields stretching in all directions. The sedan stopped as well, about 50 yards behind me. We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, 2 vehicles alone in the darkness. Then, the sedan's headlights went out. In my mirrors, all I could see was a dark shape against the deeper darkness of the night. I held my breath, waiting for movement, for some indication of the driver's intentions. Nothing happened. Minutes ticked by. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The stillness became unbearable. Finally, I made a decision. I hit the gas, the truck lurching forward as I sped away from the crossroads. In my mirrors, I saw the sedan remain motionless, a silent witness to my escape. I found my way back to the highway and pushed my truck to its limit, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever had been following me. Only when I saw signs for another town ahead did I allow myself to breathe normally again. I didn't stop driving until dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. By then, I was exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline and fear. But I had reached my destination, the warehouse in New Mexico, where I was to deliver the lumber. As workers began unloading my cargo, I leaned against the side of my truck, watching numbly. I should have felt relief. The delivery was made on time, my job completed successfully. In a few hours, I could begin the long journey home. But all I felt was dread, because going home meant making a choice. Find a new route that avoided Logan's Gap entirely, or confront whatever waited for me there. The warehouse foreman handed me the signed delivery confirmation, officially releasing me from my obligation. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my logbook. Technically, I was free to head home now. The job was done. I sat in my empty truck, staring at the atlas spread across my lap. There were 3 possible routes back. The first backtracked exactly the way I'd come, passing through Logan's Gap. The fastest route, but unthinkable after what had happened. The second cut east before turning north, adding about 3 hours to the journey, but bypassing Logan's Gap entirely. The safe option. The third route was the longest, taking me west through more populated areas before heading north. It would add nearly a day to my trip, but it kept me on major highways with plenty of traffic and well-lit rest areas. Logic dictated I take the second route. It was a reasonable compromise, not too much added time but enough deviation to avoid Logan's Gap and its mysterious rest stop. But something nagged at me. Max was missing. He'd warned me about the rest stop, and now he was gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow involved, that his disappearance was connected to our brief interaction. And what about the sedan that had followed me? Was that related too? Or just an isolated incident, a coincidence blown out of proportion by my frayed nerves? I closed the atlas, decision made. I would take the second route, avoiding Logan's Gap. Whatever had happened there, it wasn't my problem. I hadn't asked to be involved in whatever this was. I just wanted to get home, sleep in my own bed, and forget about the whole thing. 3 hours into my return journey, I stopped at a small roadside diner for lunch. The place was nearly empty, just an elderly couple in one booth and a solitary trucker at the counter. I slid into a booth by the window, ordered a burger from a tired-looking waitress, and tried to relax. A newspaper someone had left behind caught my eye. I pulled it closer, scanning the front page out of habit rather than interest. A small headline near the bottom made my heart skip a beat. Body found at rest. Stop, foul play suspected. I read the article with growing horror. A body had been discovered at a rest area off Highway 49 near mile marker 47. The exact location Max had directed me to. The victim, initially unidentified, had been found by a morning cleaning crew. The article was light on details, but mentioned signs of extreme violence and unusual circumstances. My hands trembled as I set the paper down. This couldn't be coincidence. The rest stop, the body, Max's disappearance, the strange figure I'd encountered. They were all connected. I left my food untouched, tossed some bills on the table, and hurried back to my truck. Inside the cab, I locked the doors and sat in silence, trying to think. If the body at the rest stop was Max's, then my encounter with him at the gas station had been his last night alive. His warning. Sometimes people go to that rest stop and don't come back. Now seemed prophetic. But why had he gone there, and who, or what, had killed him? The logical part of my brain screamed at me to stay away, to stick to my plan, take the alternate route home, and let the authorities handle whatever was happening in Logan's Gap. But another part, a part I barely recognized, whispered that I was already involved, that I might have information that could help make sense of Max's death, or that I might be next. I started the engine. Decision made. I would go back to Logan's Gap, not to play detective or hero, but to understand what had happened, to make sense of what I'd seen. And perhaps, though I barely admitted it to myself, to confirm that the figure at the rest stop was something mundane and explicable, not the supernatural entity my fears had conjured. The drive back to Logan's Gap took longer than expected. A storm was brewing, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the sky. By the time I reached the familiar exit, rain was falling in heavy sheets, drumming against the roof of my cab. The town looked different in the rain, smaller, more decrepit. Buildings I hadn't noticed before came into view. Abandoned storefronts with boarded windows. Houses with sagging porches and peeling paint. Logan's Gap wasn't just small, it was dying. I drove slowly down the main street, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. The gas station where I'd met Max stood at the edge of town just as before. But now police tape surrounded the property, fluttering in the wind. A single police cruiser was parked out front, lights off. I pulled into a diner across the street, parking where I could observe the gas station. The diner was empty except for an elderly waitress who barely looked up when I entered. I ordered coffee and took a seat by the window, watching the rain-soaked scene across the street. After about 20 minutes, a figure emerged from the gas station. A police officer in a rain slicker running toward his cruiser. He climbed in, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving the gas station dark and empty behind the police tape. This was my chance. I waited until the cruiser's taillights disappeared around a corner, then left some money on the table and hurried back to my truck. The rain had lessened slightly, but I was still soaked by the time I slid behind the wheel. I drove across the street and parked behind the gas station, out of sight from the main road. What I was about to do was probably illegal, trespassing at best, interfering with a crime scene at worst, but I needed answers, and this seemed like the place to start. The back door of the station was locked, but a window had been left partially open, presumably for ventilation. I squeezed through, finding myself in a small storeroom stacked with boxes of snacks and cigarette cartons. The interior of the gas station was eerily quiet. The only sound the soft patter of rain against the windows. In the dim light filtering through the blinds, I could make out the counter where Max had stood, the shelves of merchandise, the coolers along the back wall. Everything looked normal, undisturbed. I moved carefully toward the counter, searching for anything that might explain what had happened to Max. A stack of paperbacks sat where I'd seen him reading one, worn, dog-eared thrillers with lurid covers. A half-empty cup of coffee had congealed into a dark sludge. An open pack of cigarettes lay next to an ashtray filled with butts. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of struggle, no evidence that Max had left unwillingly. I was about to give up when I noticed a small notebook tucked beneath the counter. It was a personal journal, the cheap kind you can buy at any drugstore. I flipped it open, feeling like an intruder but too curious to stop. The entries were sporadic, sometimes days or weeks apart. Most were mundane observations about life in Logan's Gap, complaints about customers, notes about the weather, reminders to order supplies. But the most recent entries caught my attention. Third disappearance this month. Sheriff says it's just people passing through, moving on without telling anyone. But I know better. It's the thing at the rest stop. It's getting hungrier. A chill ran down my spine as I read the words. The next entry, dated just 2 days before my arrival, was even more disturbing. Saw it in town today. Standing across the street watching the station. No one else seemed to notice, or if they did, they pretended not to. It's how this town survives. We look the other way. We sacrifice the travelers so it leaves us alone. The final entry, dated the night I'd met Max, was brief but terrifying. Another traveler tonight. Told him about the rest stop. God forgive me. But if not him, then who? If not him, then me. I closed the journal, hands shaking. Max hadn't been trying to warn me. He'd been sending me to my death, directing me to the rest stop as a sacrifice to whatever lurked there. And when I'd escaped, when the thing at the rest stop had been denied its intended victim, it had taken Max instead. A noise from the front of the store made me freeze. Headlights swept across the windows as a vehicle pulled into the lot. I ducked down behind the counter, heart pounding. Through the blinds, I could make out the shape of a police cruiser. The officer had returned. I needed to get out, fast. Clutching Max's journal, I crept back toward the storeroom and the open window. As I reached it, I heard the jingle of keys at the front door. I scrambled through the window, scraping my shoulder on the frame, and dropped to the wet ground outside. I stayed low, making my way back to my truck as quickly and quietly as possible. Inside the cab, I sat motionless, watching the gas station through the rain-streaked windshield. The officer entered, flashlight beam visible through the windows as he moved about inside. Starting the engine would draw attention. I needed to wait until he left again, or became distracted. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into eternity. Finally, his radio crackled with static, and I saw him return to the front of the store to respond. Now or never. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life with what seemed like impossible loudness. Without waiting to see if the officer had heard, I threw the truck into reverse, backed onto the street, and drove away as calmly as I could manage. In my rearview mirror, I saw the officer emerge from the gas station, flashlight scanning the darkness, but he didn't follow. I turned a corner, then another, putting distance between myself and the gas station, Max's journal sitting like a ticking bomb on the passenger seat beside me. I needed somewhere quiet to read the rest of it, somewhere safe. But in Logan's Gap, I was beginning to suspect that nowhere was truly safe. Not with the thing from the rest stop watching, waiting, hunting, and now it might be hunting me. I found a motel on the outskirts of town, a single-story structure with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. The kind of place that didn't ask questions and didn't remember faces. Perfect for what I needed, a few hours to read Max's journal and figure out my next move. The clerk barely looked up from his phone as I paid cash for a room at the end of the building, furthest from the office. The key he handed me was attached to a plastic tag with the number 13. Of course it was. Room 13 was exactly what I expected. A double bed with a sagging mattress, faded wallpaper, a bathroom with stained fixtures. But it was private and, for now at least, safe. I sat on the edge of the bed, Max's journal open in front of me, and began to read. The earliest entries dated back about a year. In them, Max described life in Logan's Gap as quiet, uneventful. He complained about the monotony of his job at the gas station, about the slow death of the town as young people moved away and businesses closed. Then, about 6 months ago, the tone changed. Something strange happened at the rest stop outside town. Jordan went up there to clean the bathrooms and found blood. A lot of it, no body, just blood. Sheriff said it was probably a wounded animal. Jordan says it looked like something had been dragged away. The entries after that documented a gradual increase in unusual occurrences. Travelers reported seeing a strange figure at the rest stop. Some locals claimed to have encountered it in town late at night. A few people, all outsiders passing through, disappeared without explanation. And then, 3 months ago, Max saw it himself. It was standing at the edge of the woods behind the gas station when I closed up tonight, just watching. Tall, thin, dressed in old clothes. I thought it was a man at first, called out to ask if they needed help. It didn't respond, just tilted its head at an angle that wasn't right. Not possible for a human neck. And its face. Jesus, its face. Like clay molded by a child, features all wrong. I ran inside and locked the door. When I looked out again, it was gone. The following entries detailed the town's response to these events. Some denied anything was happening. Others acknowledged the entity but insisted on ignoring it, treating it like a natural disaster, something to be endured rather than confronted. The most disturbing revelation came near the end of the journal. Sheriff called a town meeting tonight, said what we all already knew. It takes travelers, one every few weeks. If we direct them to the rest stop, if we make sure there's always fresh blood, it leaves us alone. A necessary sacrifice for the greater good, he called it. God help me, but I voted yes with the rest of them. What choice do we have? It's been here longer than the town. It will be here long after we're gone. The final pages contained accounts of Max's growing guilt, his struggle to reconcile his actions with his conscience, and finally, his decision to break the town's pact. I can't do this anymore. Can't send innocent people to their deaths. The trucker who stopped tonight, I was supposed to direct him to the rest stop like all the others. But I warned him instead. Told him people go there and don't come back. I don't know if he understood, if he'll heed the warning. But I've done what I can. And now I need to leave this place before they realize what I've done. Before it comes for me instead. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. Logan's Gap wasn't just a dying town, it was a cursed one. A place that had made a deal with something inhuman to ensure its own survival. And Max, in his final act of conscience, had tried to spare me from being their sacrifice. A sacrifice that had ultimately been made anyway, with Max himself as the victim. I checked my watch. Just past midnight. The storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rumbling in the distance. I needed to leave to get as far from Logan's Gap as possible. But the thought of driving in this weather, of potentially breaking down on a deserted stretch of road with that thing potentially hunting me. No, better to wait until morning. To leave when the sun was high and the roads were busy with day traffic. I'd sleep for a few hours, then go. I lay on the bed fully clothed, Max's journal clutched to my chest, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually won out. I drifted off to the sound of rain on the roof, thunder growling like a hungry beast in the distance. The dream came almost immediately. I was standing at the rest stop, but it was different, older, more decrepit. The gravel lot was overgrown with weeds, the picnic tables rotted and collapsed. The building that housed the bathrooms had fallen in on itself, only a partial wall still standing. And it was there, watching me from the edge of the trees. The figure from the rest stop, the thing that had hunted me. In the dream, I could see it clearly for the first time. Its skin was indeed gray, but not the gray of stone as I'd thought before. It was the gray of decay, of flesh long dead but somehow still animated. Its eyes were empty sockets, bottomless and dark, and its mouth, a jagged tear across its face, lined with teeth too numerous and too sharp to be human. It stepped forward, moving with that same jerky, unnatural gait. In the dream I couldn't move, couldn't run. I was frozen in place as it approached, its dead eyes fixed on me, its mouth opening wider than any human mouth should be able to open. I woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright on the motel bed. The room was dark, the storm still raging outside. But something was different. The quality of the darkness had changed. It felt thicker, more oppressive, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, the coppery tang of blood. I fumbled for the lamp on the bedside table, fingers finding the switch. The light revealed nothing unusual, just the shabby motel room, exactly as I'd left it before falling asleep. Max's journal lay beside me on the bed, undisturbed. But that smell? I got up, moving cautiously toward the bathroom. The door was closed, though I couldn't remember shutting it before lying down. My hand hovered over the knob, hesitating. Everything in me screamed not to open that door, to run, to flee while I still could. Instead, I turned the knob slowly, pushing the door open just a crack. The bathroom was dark, but even in the dim light spilling from the bedroom, I could see the figure standing in the shower stall. Tall, thin, its head tilted at that impossible angle. It wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, just standing, watching. I slammed the door shut, heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be happening. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and Max's journal and the strange atmosphere of this town. But the smell of blood was stronger now, seeping under the door. And I could hear something too, a soft, wet sound, like moist clay being molded by invisible hands. I backed away from the bathroom door, grabbed Max's journal and my truck keys, and ran. Out of the motel room, into the pouring rain, across the parking lot to where my truck was parked. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door and climb inside. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the rain-soaked night. I threw the truck into reverse, tires spinning on the wet pavement, and peeled out of the motel parking lot. Through my rearview mirror, I saw it emerge from my room, that tall, thin figure with its tilted head and gray skin. It stood in the middle of the lot, rain passing through it as if it were made of smoke, watching me flee, but not pursuing, not this time. I drove recklessly, too fast for the conditions, desperate to put distance between myself and Logan's Gap. The highway stretched ahead, almost invisible in the downpour, my wipers barely keeping up with the deluge. After 20 miles, I began to breathe easier. Whatever that thing was, it seemed content to let me go. Perhaps it had taken Max as its sacrifice and was satisfied for now. Or perhaps, and this thought chilled me despite its hopeful implications, it could only hunt within the boundaries of its territory, the area around Logan's Gap, and that cursed rest stop. I drove through the night, stopping only when absolutely necessary for fuel. By dawn, I was 3 states away, the storm long behind me, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. I pulled into a busy truck stop, parked among dozens of other rigs, and finally allowed myself to relax. Max's journal sat on the passenger seat, a grim reminder of what I'd experienced. I considered destroying it, burning the pages to ash and scattering them to the wind. But something stopped me. This was evidence, not just of the supernatural entity that haunted Logan's Gap, but of the town's complicity in the deaths of countless travelers. I wasn't sure what to do with it. Going to the authorities seemed pointless. What police department would believe a tale of a supernatural predator and a town that sacrificed outsiders to appease it? They'd dismiss me as delusional at best, suspect me of Max's murder at worst. For now, I decided to keep the journal safe, to document my own experiences alongside Max's, creating a record that might someday help others understand the truth about Logan's Gap, and perhaps, someday, find a way to end the horror that dwelled there. As I sat in my truck, watching the morning bustle of the truck stop around me, a news broadcast caught my attention from a television mounted above the fuel desk. A reporter stood in the rain, Logan's Gap visible in the background. Authorities have identified the body found at a local rest stop as Maxwell Reed, a gas station attendant reported missing earlier this week. Police are investigating the death as a homicide, though they have yet to name any suspects. This marks the 5th unexplained death or disappearance in the area in the past 3 months. I turned away, unable to watch more. Poor Max. He'd tried to break the cycle, to save me from becoming another sacrifice. And he'd paid for it with his life. I started my truck, determined to complete my journey home, to return to the life I'd known before Logan's Gap. But as I pulled back onto the highway, I knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The world was bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. And somewhere, in a small, dying town with a terrible secret, something ancient and hungry continued to watch the road for travelers, for sacrifices, for people who would never be missed. I used to think trucking was a good way to keep to myself, long hours, quiet nights, and nobody asking questions. But now I understand that isolation isn't always safety. Sometimes it makes you vulnerable. Sometimes it makes you prey. Every few months I hear rumors from other drivers, whispers about a town called Logan's Gap, about travelers who stopped there and never reached their destinations, about a rest stop where it's best not to linger after dark. I tell them what I know. I warn them to stay away, and I watch their faces, looking for signs that they believe me. Most don't. Most laugh it off, chalk it up to another trucker's tall tale. But some, the ones who've been on the road long enough, who've seen things they can't explain, some of them nod quietly. They understand that the highways of America hold secrets darker than most care to admit. And when night falls, they check their maps carefully, planning routes that take them far, far away from Logan's Gap. I know I'll never go back there. But sometimes on long nights when I'm driving alone on empty highways, I check my mirrors a little more often. I watch for headlights that follow too closely, too consistently. And I wonder if the thing from the rest stop is content to stay within its territory, or if, having caught my scent once, it might someday decide to extend its hunting grounds. After all, the road is long, and I'm still out here alone in the dark. In my 12 years as a small-town cop, I've seen things that most people wouldn't believe. I mean, hell, most of us joined the force thinking we'll just be dealing with drunk teenagers, domestic disputes, and the occasional fender bender. But here I was, in November of 1999, staring at something that didn't make a lick of sense. I'd like to think I'm the kind of guy who can handle most things life throws at him. Grew up working on my uncle's cattle ranch, so you get used to the smell of manure and the sight of blood real fast. But what happened that night? No one gets used to that. Now, Turtle Dove ain't much of a town, just shy of 800 people on a good day. We've got one traffic light, a diner, and a sheriff's office that's smaller than most people's living rooms. Usually I'm patrolling back roads or responding to calls about cows wandering off someone's property. My shift started like any other. I kissed my wife Donna goodbye while she stood in our kitchen doorway, arms crossed, eyebrows raised in that way that said she was worried but wouldn't admit it. "Don't wait up," I told her, knowing full well she would. "Just be careful, Hank," she said, brushing a strand of graying hair behind her ear. "Weather report says fog's rolling in tonight." I nodded, patting the gun at my hip, almost unconsciously. Always am. The cruiser smelled like old coffee and pine-scented air freshener, a sad attempt to mask the lingering odor of vomit from when I'd hauled in Ross Becker last weekend. Some men can't handle their liquor, especially when they've just been laid off from the only factory in town. The radio crackled with static as I drove down Main Street. Turtle Dove was already closing up for the night, storefronts dark except for Miller's Gas and Grocery, which stayed open till 11. I gave a nod to old Pete Miller as I drove past, and he raised his coffee mug in silent greeting. On this particular night, I was heading out to patrol near Becker's Ridge, a rocky outcropping about 10 miles out of town where local teenagers like to hang out and do things they weren't supposed to. I figured I'd swing by, shine a light, and send them scurrying home. The road to Becker's Ridge curved through dense woods, the kind that seemed to swallow light. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and there was something about the way the trees loomed over the road that made me uneasy, like they were watching. As I was driving up the gravel road, I noticed something weird. There was a pickup truck parked just off the path, headlights off, but engine running. I recognized it immediately as one of the old beaters that belonged to Jack Winters, a guy I went to high school with, and let's just say he hadn't exactly made the best life choices. Jack was one of those guys who always skirted trouble, but never got caught. Still, he wasn't the type to sit quietly in his truck without stirring up some kind of nonsense. I pulled over, leaving my cruiser idling as I approached. When I got close, I saw the door was ajar. And that's when I noticed something off. There was a streak of what looked like mud on the side of the truck, but it smelled different, like copper. And I've been around enough blood in my life to know what that scent meant. "Jack, you in there?" I called out, one hand resting on my holster. No response. I grabbed my flashlight from my belt and shone it into the cab. The driver's seat was empty, but the floor was splattered with more of that same coppery substance, a lot more than I was comfortable with. The interior light was on, illuminating the mess inside. Jack's phone was still on the dashboard, and his keys dangled from the ignition. A half-empty bottle of Jim Beam sat in the cup holder, and a pack of cigarettes lay open on the passenger seat, one cigarette pulled halfway out like he'd been interrupted. My gut told me something wasn't right, but there wasn't any immediate sign of danger. Still, you don't ignore that kind of thing. I radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Hank Laraway over near Becker's Ridge. Found a vehicle belonging to Jack Winters. Appears abandoned. Possible blood inside. I'm going to investigate." The crackle of the dispatcher's voice came back. "Copy that, Hank. Need backup?" "Nah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Probably nothing, just making sure." I wish I'd asked for backup. The air felt different as I stepped away from my vehicle, colder somehow. The fog Donna had mentioned was starting to roll in, wisps of it curling between trees like ghostly fingers. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders and flicked my flashlight back and forth across the ground. That's when I spotted them. Footprints leading away from Jack's truck and into the woods. I followed a set of muddy footprints leading away from the truck and into the woods. Now the thing about Wyoming is, once you get off the beaten path, the terrain gets rough fast. The ground was uneven, rocks and roots jutting out, making it easy to trip if you weren't careful. But these tracks, they were fresh, still squishy from the rain earlier that day. The deeper I went, the more I realized something was wrong. The footprints weren't just one set, they split off into two. One set looked like they belonged to Jack, size 11, scuffed work boots, typical stuff. But the other set? I stopped dead in my tracks, crouching down to examine them closer. They were bigger than any humans should be, not just long but wide, like something heavy was pressing into the soft earth. I ran my fingers along the edge of one print, feeling the sharp indentation where it cut into the mud. The prints had distinct toes, too many of them, like a bear's paw, but elongated, stretched in a way that wasn't right. I'd seen bears before, hell, I'd hunted a few. This wasn't a bear. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness ahead, and I instinctively reached for my gun. The fog had thickened, limiting visibility to maybe 15 feet in any direction. The forest sounds, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, had gone silent. Something was watching me. I could feel it, a cold sensation creeping up my neck. "Jack?" I called, my voice sounding weak against the pressing silence. "Sheriff's Department, answer me if you can hear me." Nothing but the soft whisper of fog swirling between the trees. I should have gone back for backup. I should have called in animal control, or hell, the state police. But instead I did the stupidest thing possible. I kept going, following those strange tracks deeper into the woods. My flashlight beam cutting through the mist like a knife through cold butter. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing in close, their branches reaching out like bony fingers. My boots squelched in the mud, each step taking me further from safety and deeper into whatever nightmare lurked ahead. That's when I heard it. A sound coming from ahead of me, something between a grunt and a wet, rattling breath. Low, unnatural. The sound made my skin prickle with warning, an instinctual reaction to something that shouldn't exist. My first instinct was to call out, but something in my gut told me to keep quiet. I slowly crept forward, every muscle tense, my breath fogging in the cold November air. Ahead I saw movement between the trees, a large, hulking figure silhouetted against the moonlight that occasionally broke through the fog. Whatever it was dragging something. Jack, maybe. His limp body bounced against the rocks, the figure carrying him like he weighed no more than a sack of flour. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't armed with my shotgun. That was back in the cruiser, figuring I wouldn't need it tonight. Big mistake. Still, I couldn't just leave Jack. I had to at least see what was going on, right? I edged closer, careful not to make a sound. The fog parted momentarily, and I caught a glimpse of Jack's face, pale and bloodied, his eyes closed. He was either unconscious or dead. I couldn't tell which. And that's when I saw what was dragging him. As I got within 20 feet of the figure, it turned slightly, and I caught my first real glimpse of it. Its skin was slick and wet-looking, almost reptilian but with patches of fur in strange places. It had limbs like a man, But its head, God, I'll never forget that head. Elongated like a lizard's, but with tusks curving out from its jaw. It reminded me of a Komodo dragon, only standing upright, hulking, and much, much more grotesque. The thing stood at least 7 feet tall, its shoulders broad and hunched, powerful muscles rippling beneath that strange patchwork skin. And then it sniffed the air. I froze, praying it hadn't noticed me, but luck wasn't on my side. In one swift motion, the thing dropped Jack's body to the ground and whipped its head towards me, letting out a screech that rattled the trees around us. Its eyes caught the light from my flashlight, reflecting back at me like yellow lanterns in the dark. They weren't the mindless eyes of an animal. There was intelligence there, cold and calculating. Those eyes locked onto mine with terrible recognition. For a split second, I considered running, but I knew it would outrun me. Instead, I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a thick branch lying on the ground, and held it up in front of me like it was going to do something against this monster. The creature stalked toward me, slow at first, almost like it was playing with its food. I could see the intelligence in its eyes, the way it sized me up like it had done this before. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. I could tell it enjoyed the hunt, the fear. I gripped the branch tighter, my knuckles white. "Come on, you ugly bastard," I muttered under my breath, knowing damn well this thing didn't understand a word I said. Then it lunged. I swung the branch with all my strength, catching it across the face. It didn't slow it down for a second. The thing's claws tore through the air, slicing through my uniform and into my shoulder like a hot knife through butter. The pain was immediate and intense, a burning sensation that spread across my chest. I felt warm blood soaking through my shirt, but I didn't let go of the branch. I swung again, this time aiming lower, hitting it across the knee. It staggered. That's when I heard Jack. He wasn't dead, at least not yet. He groaned from the ground, barely conscious, but alive. I had to get him out of there. The creature recovered quickly, circling me now, looking for an opening. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, yellowed and sharp. A thick, viscous saliva dripped from its jaws, sizzling when it hit the ground. I swung again, harder this time, and by some miracle the creature stumbled back. I didn't waste a second. I rushed to Jack, grabbed him by the collar, and started dragging him back toward the truck. The creature made a sound behind me, not a roar, more like the sound of air being forced through narrow pipes, wet and guttural. I didn't stop to look. I just ran, my shoulder burning with every step, Jack's weight nearly pulling me down. The fog seemed thicker now, disorienting me. Trees loomed out of the mist, forcing me to change direction. I could hear the creature behind us, its heavy footfalls splashing through puddles, branches cracking under its weight. "Come on, Jack," I grunted, half dragging, half carrying him. "Help me out here, buddy." Jack mumbled something incomprehensible, his head lolling against his chest. Blood coated the front of his shirt, dark and sticky. I don't know how I found my way back through that fog. Maybe it was pure adrenaline, or maybe it was the desperate instinct of prey fleeing a predator. But somehow, we broke through the tree line, and I saw the welcome sight of Jack's truck, exactly where I'd left it. When we reached the truck, I threw Jack into the passenger seat and jumped in behind the wheel. My hand was shaking so bad I nearly dropped the keys. The engine roared to life just as the creature burst from the tree line, its tusks gleaming in the moonlight. I floored it, gravel flying as the tires spun, the truck lurching forward. It chased us for a good quarter-mile, slamming its fists into the back of the truck, leaving dents the size of bowling balls. But eventually it gave up, disappearing into the darkness as I sped down the road, my heart racing. I glanced over at Jack, who was slumped against the door, his breathing shallow and ragged. "Hang in there, Jack. We're almost to town." But he didn't respond. His face was deathly pale, his lips tinged blue. I pressed harder on the accelerator, the speedometer climbing past 80 as we raced toward Turtle Dove. I fumbled for my radio with my good arm, the other one still bleeding heavily. "Dispatch, this is Hank. I've got Jack Winters badly injured. Looks like an animal attack. Tell Doc Warren to meet us at the clinic, and it's bad. Real bad." "Copy that, Hank," came the reply, the voice now belonging to Mabel Jenkins, who worked the night shift. "What kind of animal?" I hesitated, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. half expecting to see that thing following us. "I don't know," I finally said. "I've never seen anything like it." Jack didn't make it. He died before we reached the clinic, his body torn up worse than anything I'd ever seen. Doc Warren said he'd lost too much blood, but he couldn't explain the injuries. Said it looked like an animal attack, but he'd never seen anything like it. "What the hell did this, Hank?" Doc asked, his face pale as he looked down at Jack's body. I couldn't tell him what I'd seen. Hell, who would believe me? "Mountain lion, maybe," I offered weakly. "It was dark, foggy. I didn't get a good look." Doc Warren shook his head, pointing at a series of puncture wounds on Jack's torso. "No mountain lion makes marks like these. These look more like, I don't know, bites from something with tusks." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I need to make my report," I said, backing toward the door. "Sheriff's gonna want to know what happened." Back at the station, I sat at my desk, staring at the blank incident report form. My shoulder had been stitched up by Doc Warren, who told me I was lucky. Whatever had slashed me had missed anything vital. 27 stitches later, my uniform shirt cut away and replaced with a spare from my locker, I still couldn't bring myself to write down what I'd seen. Sheriff Roy Walters was a practical man who dealt in facts, not fairy tales. How could I tell him I'd seen some kind of monster in the woods, that it had killed Jack Winters and nearly killed me too? In the end, I filed my report, kept it simple. Possible animal attack near Becker's Ridge, 1 fatality. Victim identified as Jack Winters, 42, of Turtle Dove. Attacked while parked in his vehicle. Deputy Laraway attempted rescue but was unsuccessful. Nothing about the creature, nothing about the strange footprints or the tusks. Just the facts, as far as anyone needed to know. But I know what I saw out there. And I know it wasn't the last time that thing's gonna kill. The next morning, I woke up to Donna standing over me, worry etched on her face. I'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey half empty beside me. "Hank," she said softly, her hand on my uninjured shoulder. "You need to get some proper rest." I blinked up at her, the events of the previous night rushing back. "What time is it?" "Almost noon. Sheriff Walters called. Said to take the day off, what with your injury and all." She paused, studying my face. "You want to tell me what really happened out there?" I rubbed my face, feeling the stubble beneath my fingers. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." She sat down across from me, pushing the whiskey bottle aside. "Try me." So I told her. Everything. The strange footprints, the creature with its lizard head and too many teeth, the way it moved, too fast for something so large. I told her how it had torn into Jack Winters, how I'd barely managed to get away. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, her hands folded in front of her. "You're right," she finally said. "I don't believe you." "Donna," "But," she interrupted, "I believe you saw something, and whatever it was, scared the hell out of you." She reached across the table and took my hand. "That's enough for me." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her understanding, even if she didn't fully believe my story. "I need to go back out there," I said, "today while it's light. There might be evidence, something to prove what I saw." Donna's grip tightened. "Are you crazy? After what happened to Jack?" "I can't just let this go," I insisted. "What if it comes into town? What if it hurts someone else?" She released my hand and stood up. "At least wait for backup. Call the state police and tell them what? That there's a monster in the woods? They'll laugh me out of the county." Donna stared at me for a long moment before sighing. "Fine, but you take your shotgun, and you call me every hour, you understand? Every hour." I nodded, already pushing back from the table. "I promise." An hour later, I was back at Becker's Ridge, my cruiser parked where Jack's truck had been the night before. The tow company had already come and gone, taking the blood-stained vehicle away. In the daylight, with the fog cleared, the woods didn't seem quite so menacing. But I knew better now. I had my shotgun with me this time, loaded with slugs that could stop a bear. If that thing showed up again, I'd be ready. My shoulder ached beneath the bandages as I followed the same path I'd taken last night. The footprints were still there, though partially dried out now. I knelt down to examine them again, confirming what I'd seen in the darkness. They weren't human, and they weren't from any animal native to Wyoming. I followed the tracks, deeper into the woods, my eyes constantly scanning the trees around me. Birds chirped overhead, and squirrels darted between branches, normal forest sounds that had been absent the night before. Eventually, I reached the spot where I'd first seen the creature. Blood had soaked into the ground, turning the soil dark and crusty. Jack's blood. I knelt down, examining the area more closely. That's when I noticed something I'd missed in the dark: claw marks on a nearby tree, deep grooves cut into the bark at about head height. I ran my fingers along the marks. They were fresh, the wood still oozing sap. Whatever had made these had powerful claws, sharp enough to gouge solid wood. A twig snapped somewhere behind me, and I whirled around, shotgun raised. But it was just a deer, startled by my presence, bounding away through the underbrush. I continued my search, following what appeared to be the creature's path after it had given up chasing us. The tracks led deeper into the woods, over a small ridge, and down into a ravine I hadn't known was there. At the bottom of the ravine was a small stream, and beside it, something that made my blood run cold. Bones. Lots of them scattered across the ground like discarded trash. Most appeared to be animal bones, deer probably, and smaller mammals. But there were others that looked disturbingly human. Among the bones was a backpack, torn and mud-stained, but recognizable. I nudged it open with the barrel of my shotgun, revealing a water bottle, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in plastic, and a wallet. I carefully extracted the wallet, flipping it open to reveal a driver's license. Michael Sutter, I read aloud. The face in the photo was young, maybe early 20s. The license had been issued in Colorado. I remembered hearing about a hiker who'd gone missing in these woods about 6 months ago. The search had been called off after 2 weeks with no sign of him. Had he met the same fate as Jack? As I stood up, something caught my eye. A dark opening in the rock face on the far side of the ravine. A cave, partially hidden by vegetation. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to get out of there and call for backup. But I needed evidence, something concrete to show Sheriff Walters. The cave entrance was low, forcing me to duck as I approached. The smell hit me first, a rancid, putrid odor that made my eyes water. Death and rot and something else, something I couldn't identify. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness inside the cave. The floor was littered with more bones, some fresh, with bits of flesh still clinging to them. The walls were streaked with dried blood, and something that looked like slime, glistening in the light. And there, at the back of the cave, was a pile of what appeared to be clothing, torn, bloodied garments that might have belonged to the creature's victims. I stepped carefully over the bones, my shotgun raised, ready to fire at the slightest movement. The cave was empty, the creature nowhere to be seen. I exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving my body. But where had it gone? Did it only hunt at night? I approached the pile of clothing, using the barrel of my shotgun to sift through it. Jeans, t-shirts, a hiking boot, all ripped and stained with dried blood. And something else, something that made my heart skip a beat. A sheriff's department badge, bent and tarnished but unmistakable. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. The name was still legible: Deputy Samuel Reed, Cascade County. Cascade County was about 100 miles north of Turtle Dove. I'd never met Deputy Reed, but I'd heard his name on the police radio from time to time. According to the regional bulletin, he'd gone missing 3 months ago while investigating reports of poaching. Now I knew what had happened to him. I pocketed the badge, my mind racing. This thing, whatever it was, had been killing for months, maybe longer. And not just hikers or locals, it had taken down a trained law enforcement officer. The sound came without warning, that same wet, rattling breath I'd heard the night before. It echoed through the cave, seemingly coming from everywhere at once. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the cave walls. Nothing, but the sound came again, closer this time. Then I saw it, not inside the cave, but at the entrance, silhouetted against the daylight. The creature stood there, watching me, its yellow eyes reflecting the light like a cat's. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, with a speed that seemed impossible for its size, it lunged into the cave. I fired my shotgun, the blast deafening in the confined space. The slug hit the creature in the shoulder, tearing away a chunk of its strange flesh. But it didn't stop. It kept coming, those tusked jaws opening wide. I chambered another round and fired again, this one catching it in the chest. The impact knocked it back, giving me precious seconds to scramble toward a narrow crevice in the cave wall, too small for the creature to follow. I squeezed through, the rough stone scraping against my injured shoulder, reopening the wound. I felt warm blood soaking through my bandage, but I didn't stop. The crevice opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, with a shaft of light coming from above. An opening, maybe big enough for me to climb through. Behind me, the creature howled in frustration, its clawed hands reaching into the crevice trying to grab me. I could hear its ragged breathing, smell its foul odor. I fired one more shot through the crevice, not aiming, just hoping to buy myself some time. Then I turned and began to climb toward the light, my injured arm screaming in protest. The opening was about 15 feet up, a narrow gap in the rock ceiling that let in just enough light to see by. Below me, I could hear the creature still trying to force its way through the crevice, the sound of stone cracking under pressure. I reached the opening, pulling myself up and out with my last reserves of strength. I emerged onto a rocky outcropping, the forest spreading out below me. I was on the other side of the ridge, maybe a half-mile from where I'd left my cruiser. Without pausing to catch my breath, I started running, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I didn't stop until I reached my vehicle, practically throwing myself inside and locking the doors. My hands shook as I started the engine and peeled away from Becker's Ridge, the tires skidding on the loose gravel. In my rearview mirror, I thought I saw a shape emerge from the tree line, watching me go. But maybe that was just my imagination, fueled by fear and adrenaline. As I drove back to town, one thought kept repeating in my mind. I had to convince Sheriff Walters that there was something out there, something that needed to be stopped before it killed again. Sheriff Roy Walters was a man who believed in what he could see, touch, and measure. 25 years on the force had taught him to trust evidence over stories, facts over feelings. So when I walked into his office that afternoon, my uniform torn and bloodied, clutching Deputy Reed's badge in my hand, I knew I had an uphill battle ahead of me. Jesus, Hank, what happened to you? Walters stood up from behind his desk, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in concern. Thought I told you to take the day off. I went back to Becker's Ridge, I said, dropping into the chair across from him. I placed Reed's badge on the desk between us. Found this in a cave, along with a lot of bones. Walters picked up the badge, examining it closely. This is Reed's, the deputy from Cascade County. I nodded. He went missing 3 months ago. Now we know why. A bear could have dragged his body into that cave, Walters suggested, but I could see doubt in his eyes. It wasn't a bear, Roy. I leaned forward, wincing as pain shot through my shoulder. I saw it again, in daylight this time. I don't know what it is, but it's not any animal I've ever seen. Walters sighed, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. Hank, you've had a traumatic experience. You saw Jack Winters get killed. By a monster, I interrupted. Not a mountain lion, not a bear, something else. Listen to yourself, Walters said, his voice gentler now. You're talking crazy. I pulled out my phone, showing him the photos I'd taken in the cave. The bones, the torn clothing, the claw marks on the tree. Does this look like a normal animal to you? Walters studied the photos, his expression grave. I'll give you that something strange is going on, he conceded. But let's not jump to conclusions. We need to approach this methodically. People are dying, Roy, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. Jack, Reed, that hiker from Colorado. How many more before we do something? What exactly do you propose we do? Chase a monster through the woods? I hadn't thought that far ahead. What could we do against a creature like the one I'd seen? We need to warn people at the very least. Tell them to stay away from Becker's Ridge, especially at night. Walters nodded slowly. I can do that. I'll issue a warning about increased predator activity in the area. He held up a hand when I started to protest. That's the best I can do without more concrete evidence, Hank. I can't go telling folks there's a monster in the woods based on one deputy's testimony, no matter how much I trust him. I understood his position, even if I didn't like it. Fine, but I want to investigate further. There might be others who've seen this thing or signs of it elsewhere in the county. All right, Walters agreed, but you don't go alone, and you don't go back to that cave without proper backup, clear? Clear, I said, though I wasn't sure who'd believe me enough to provide that backup. As it turned out, I didn't have to look far. Donna had called her brother, Greg Porter, who worked as a game warden for the state. He arrived in Turtle Dove the next day, his truck loaded with tracking equipment and a high-powered rifle. Donna says you've got a problem, animal, Greg said as we sat in the diner, going over my notes and photos. He was a stocky man with a no-nonsense attitude and the kind of calm confidence that comes from spending decades in the wilderness. It's not like any animal I've ever seen, I told him, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard by the other diners. Greg studied the photos on my phone, his expression unreadable. These tracks, they're unusual, he admitted, almost like a bear. But the gait is all wrong, and those claw marks are too precise, too deliberate. You believe me? I asked, surprised. Greg looked up, his eyes serious. I believe you saw something. Whether it's what you think it is, I don't know. But I've been a warden for 20 years, and I've learned not to dismiss reports just because they sound crazy. We spent the rest of the day interviewing locals who lived near Becker's Ridge, asking if they'd seen or heard anything unusual in recent months. Most hadn't, but a few mentioned strange noises at night, sounds that weren't quite animal, weren't quite human. Old Mrs. Finch, who lived in a cabin at the edge of the woods, told us her dogs had been refusing to go outside after dark for weeks now. They just sit by the door and whine, she said, pouring us coffee in her cluttered kitchen. And sometimes I hear something moving around outside. Heavy footsteps like a man, but not a man. Have you seen anything? Greg asked. Mrs. Finch shook her head. Just shadows. But I keep my shotgun loaded these days, just in case. By late afternoon, we'd compiled enough reports to establish a pattern. Whatever this thing was, it seemed to have a territory centered around Becker's Ridge, but extending several miles in each direction. It was primarily nocturnal, though my encounter in the cave proved it could be active during the day as well. I want to set up trail cameras, Greg said as we drove back to town. Motion-activated, high resolution. If this thing exists, we'll get it on film. I nodded, relief washing over me. Finally, someone who took me seriously. When can we start? Tomorrow morning. I've got 4 cameras in my truck and I can have more sent from the state office if we need them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature's face, those yellow eyes staring back at me from the darkness of the cave. Donna lay beside me, her breathing even and peaceful, untroubled by the horrors I'd witnessed. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. As I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street, a shadow moved in my peripheral vision, something large, passing beneath the streetlight at the end of our driveway. My heart hammered in my chest as I pressed closer to the glass, straining to see. But whatever it was had vanished into the darkness. Sleep wasn't going to come, so I headed to the station early, reviewing old reports of missing persons and unexplained animal attacks in the area. There weren't many. Turtle Dove was usually a quiet place. But over the past year, there had been a noticeable uptick. 3 hikers missing in the national forest to the north. A camper found dead near Silver Lake, his body severely mauled, according to the report. A local hunter who never returned from a trip to, my blood ran cold, Becker's Ridge. I was still poring over the reports when Greg arrived, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a map in the other. I've marked 4 locations for the cameras, he said, spreading the map out on the desk. Based on the attack sites and sightings, these should give us good coverage of the creature's likely travel routes. We spent the morning setting up the cameras, carefully positioning them to capture anything moving through the area. Greg showed me how to set the sensitivity and check the memory cards, explaining that we'd need to come back every few days to collect the data. What if it destroys the cameras? I asked as we finished setting up the last one, high in a tree, overlooking the ravine where I'd found the cave. Greg shrugged. Then we'll know it's intelligent enough to recognize them as a threat, which tells us something important about what we're dealing with. We were heading back to our vehicles when Greg suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened, hearing nothing at first, then a faint, rhythmic sound, like heavy breathing but distorted somehow. It was coming from the direction of the cave. "It's in there," I said, my hand moving to my holster. Greg unslung his rifle, checking the chamber. "Maybe, or it could be an injured animal or the wind playing tricks." He glanced at me. "Only one way to find out." "You want to go in there? Now? We're armed, it's daylight, and there's two of us," Greg reasoned. "If we're going to confront this thing, now's as good a time as any." I wanted to argue, to suggest we come back with more people, more firepower, but I also knew this might be our best chance to confirm what we were dealing with. "All right," I agreed reluctantly. "But we stay together, and we don't take any unnecessary risks." Greg nodded, taking the lead as we approached the cave entrance. The smell was even worse than before, a putrid stench that made my eyes water and my stomach turn. "Something definitely died in there," Greg muttered, pulling a bandana over his nose and mouth. We clicked on our flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness of the cave. The bones were still there, scattered across the floor, but something was different. There were fresh marks in the dirt, like something had been dragged recently. "Look," Greg whispered, pointing to a dark smear on the wall. "Blood, fresh." I followed the smear with my flashlight beam all the way to the back of the cave where I'd found the pile of clothing. But the clothing was gone now, replaced by something else. Something that made my blood run cold. A body, fresh, the flesh still pink in places, though most of it had been torn away, exposing bone and sinew. It was a man, or what remained of one, dressed in flannel and jeans, a hunter maybe, or a hiker who'd strayed too far from the trail. Greg swore under his breath, his rifle trained on the dark corners of the cave. "We need to document this, then get out, now." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with fear and revulsion. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos, trying to ignore the buzzing flies and the smell of decaying flesh. "Hank," Greg's voice was tight, controlled. "Don't move." I froze, my finger hovering over the camera button. "What is it?" "Above you, on the ceiling." Slowly, I tilted my head back, following Greg's gaze to the roof of the cave, and there it was, clinging to the stone like some enormous insect, its yellow eyes fixed on me, the creature. Time seemed to slow down as I stared up at the horror clinging to the ceiling above me. Its skin was mottled, patches of scales and fur creating a grotesque patchwork. Claws like curved daggers dug into the rock, anchoring it in place. Its head was turned at an impossible angle, those yellow eyes locked on mine with terrible intelligence. Greg's rifle was aimed at the creature, his finger on the trigger. "Move slowly toward me," he instructed, his voice barely audible. "No sudden movements." I began to back away, one careful step at a time, my eyes never leaving the thing on the ceiling. It watched me go, its head rotating to follow my movement, those tusked jaws opening slightly to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. I was halfway to Greg when it moved, dropping from the ceiling with a speed that defied its size. It landed between us, cutting off my escape, its back to Greg. "Down," Greg shouted, and I dropped to the cave floor as his rifle boomed, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet struck the creature's back, tearing through flesh but seeming to cause it only momentary pain. It whirled around to face Greg, who was already chambering another round. "Get out!" Greg yelled to me as he fired again, this time aiming for the creature's head. The shot went wide as the creature lunged, its claws raking across Greg's chest, sending him stumbling backward. His rifle clattered to the ground, and suddenly he was defenseless, facing a nightmare-made flesh. I drew my service weapon, firing 3 shots in rapid succession. 2 missed in the dim light, but one hit the creature in the leg, causing it to howl. A sound like metal scraping against stone, inhuman and chilling. "Greg, run!" I shouted, firing again as the creature turned its attention back to me. But Greg wasn't running. He was reaching for something on his belt, a flare gun, the kind used to signal for help in the wilderness. Before the creature could react, he aimed and fired, the flare shooting directly into its face. The cave erupted in brilliant red light, and the creature reared back, a high-pitched, keening sound escaping its jaws. Its skin smoked where the flare had struck, the chemical fire burning through whatever strange flesh composed its face. "Now!" Greg gasped, blood seeping through his torn jacket. "While it's distracted." We stumbled toward the cave entrance, Greg leaning heavily on me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind us, the creature thrashed in agony, its howls echoing off the stone walls. Daylight had never looked so beautiful as we emerged from that cave, gulping down fresh air. But we weren't safe yet. The creature's howls were changing, becoming more enraged than pained. "It's coming," I panted, helping Greg toward the trees. "We need to move faster." "My truck," Greg wheezed. "Tranquilizer gun, heavy duty." We changed direction, heading for the access road where we'd parked our vehicles earlier. Greg's wound was worse than I'd initially thought. 4 deep gashes across his chest, bleeding freely. He was growing paler by the minute, his steps becoming more unsteady. "Stay with me, Greg," I urged, practically dragging him along. "Just a little further." The creature burst from the cave behind us, its face burned and mutilated from the flare, yet somehow even more terrifying in its rage. It paused, nostrils flaring as it caught our scent, then began to pursue, moving on all fours like some grotesque ape. It was gaining on us, covering ground with unnatural speed. We weren't going to make it to the vehicles in time. "Leave me," Greg gasped, trying to push me away. "I'll slow it down. You get help." "Like hell," I growled, pulling him along more forcefully. "We go together, or not at all." The tree line was just ahead, and beyond it the access road where our vehicles waited. I could see the edge of Greg's truck through the branches. So close, yet impossibly far. The creature was almost upon us, its ragged breathing at our backs, the stench of its burned flesh filling the air. In desperation, I drew my gun again, turned, and fired my remaining bullets directly into its damaged face. The impacts knocked it back momentarily, giving us precious seconds to reach the trees. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. And then we were on the road, Greg's truck just yards away. I fumbled with the keys he thrust into my hand, my fingers slick with his blood, as the creature emerged from the tree line behind us, snarling and spitting. The truck door swung open, and I shoved Greg inside, diving in after him and slamming the door shut just as the creature slammed into the side of the vehicle, rocking it on its wheels. "The glove compartment," Greg gasped, pointing weakly. "Trank gun." I wrenched open the compartment, finding a compact but professional-looking tranquilizer pistol inside, along with a case of darts. "Will this even work on that thing?" I asked, loading a dart with shaking hands. "Only one way to find out," Greg replied, pressing a hand to his bleeding chest. "Those are elephant doses. Should kill a bear." The creature circled the truck, testing different angles, its claws leaving deep scratches in the paint. It seemed to be looking for a way in, those yellow eyes peering through the windows with terrible intelligence. "Start the truck," Greg urged. "We need to get back to town. Get back up." I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. The creature responded by leaping onto the hood, its weight denting the metal. It peered through the windshield at us, mouth open in a silent snarl. Without hesitation, I aimed the tranquilizer gun through the glass and fired, the dart striking the creature in the neck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then it reared back, clawing at the dart before leaping off the hood and disappearing into the trees. "Did we get it?" I asked, breathing hard. Greg shook his head weakly. "Doubt it, but we bought some time." I threw the truck into gear and floored it, tires spinning on the gravel before finding purchase. As we sped down the access road, I caught a glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror, the creature, staggering but still on its feet, watching us go. "We need to warn the town," I said, grabbing my radio. "That thing's wounded and angry, no telling what it might do." Greg nodded, his face ashen. "And I need a hospital." I radioed in, reporting an officer down and requesting immediate medical assistance. Then I made another call, one I'd been dreading, to Sheriff Walters. "Roy, it's Hank. We found it, the creature. It attacked us at Becker's Ridge, injured Greg pretty bad. I'm bringing him in now." There was a long pause before Walters responded. "What's the status of this creature?" "Wounded but alive and pissed off. We need to organize a search party, armed, and warn people to stay inside, lock their doors." "Understood," Walter said, his voice grim. "I'll put out the alert and call in everyone available. Meet you at the clinic." As we raced toward town, Greg's condition worsened. He was losing too much blood, his breathing becoming more labored. "Stay with me, Greg," I urged, pushing the truck as fast as it would go. "We're almost there." "If I don't make it," he wheezed, "there's a logger in my truck, the cameras. They'll have recorded everything." "You can show me yourself," I insisted. But Greg's eyes were closing, his head lolling against the seat. We skidded into the clinic parking lot, where Doc Warren was already waiting with a gurney. They whisked Greg away, leaving me standing in the parking lot, covered in blood, his and mine, with the image of that creature still burning in my mind. Sheriff Walters arrived minutes later, taking one look at me before saying, "Jesus, Hank, you look like you went 10 rounds with a meat grinder." "You should see the other guy," I said weakly, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving me shaky and exhausted. Walters led me inside, where a nurse cleaned and rebandaged my shoulder wound, which had reopened during the fight. While she worked, I told Walters everything: the cave, the body we'd found, the attack, and our narrow escape. "Greg got it on camera," I finished. "All of it. Those trail cameras were recording when it attacked us." Walters nodded slowly. "I've got deputies heading to Becker's Ridge now to retrieve those cameras and secure the area. In the meantime, I've issued a county-wide alert. Everyone's been told to stay indoors until further notice." "That won't stop it," I said grimly. "Not if it decides to come into town." "Then we'll be ready," Walters replied, patting the shotgun at his side. "I've called in state troopers for backup, and the game warden's office is sending a team as well." Doc Warren emerged from the treatment room, his scrubs stained with blood. "Greg's stable, but those wounds are deep. I've done what I can, but he needs a trauma surgeon. Medevac's on the way to airlift him to Cheyenne." "Will he make it?" I asked, dreading the answer. Doc sighed. "If they get here soon enough, yeah, but it was close, Hank. Too close." I nodded, relief and guilt warring within me. Greg would live, but he'd nearly died helping me prove something no one believed. "What do we do now?" I asked Walters as we stepped outside, the afternoon sun beginning to dip toward the horizon. In a few hours, it would be dark. "Now," Walters said grimly, "we hunt." By dusk, a makeshift command center had been established in the sheriff's office. Maps were spread across tables, marking the creature's known territory and sightings. Deputies from neighboring counties had arrived, along with state troopers and a team from the game warden's office, all armed and ready. The trail cameras had been retrieved, and we gathered around a laptop to view the footage. It was grainy but clear enough, the creature in all its horrifying detail. Attacking Greg, being wounded by the flare and the gunshots, then pursuing us through the woods. There was a long silence when the video ended. Then one of the state troopers, a veteran who'd seen his share of strange things, said what everyone was thinking: "What the hell is that thing?" No one had an answer. Not even the wildlife experts could identify it. All we knew was that it was dangerous, intelligent, and now injured and desperate. A plan was quickly formed. 3 teams would approach the cave from different directions, armed with high-powered rifles, shotguns, and even a few tranquilizer guns. Thermal imaging equipment would help track the creature if it fled into the woods. "Remember," Walters instructed the assembled group, "this thing is fast and strong. Don't take any chances. If you see it, shoot to kill." I was assigned to lead one of the teams, despite my injured shoulder. No one knew the area around the cave better than I did, and no one else had faced the creature and lived to tell about it. As we geared up, bulletproof vests, helmets, enough firepower to start a small war, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still underestimating what we were up against. This wasn't just an animal. There was a cunning to it, a malevolence that went beyond mere predatory instinct. "You sure you're up for this?" Walters asked me privately as we checked our weapons one last time. I nodded, though my shoulder throbbed with each movement. "I need to see this through, Roy. I need to know that thing is dead." The sun had fully set by the time we reached Becker's Ridge, the forest now a maze of shadows and whispers. Night vision goggles gave everything a green, ghostly appearance as we moved through the trees in formation, communicating via hand signals and radio whispers. My team approached from the east, using the ridgeline for cover. Through the trees, I could see the other teams converging on the cave from different angles, their positions marked by occasional flashes of light as they signaled to each other. We were 50 yards from the cave entrance when one of my team members, a young state trooper named Rodriguez, stopped suddenly, holding up a fist. We all froze, weapons raised. "Movement," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. 10 o'clock near that fallen log." I peered through the darkness, seeing nothing at first, then a flicker of motion. Something large, moving low to the ground, circling around behind us. "It's flanking us," I realized aloud. "It knows we're here." Before I could give the order to regroup, a scream tore through the night. A human scream, coming from the team approaching from the north. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness, followed by more screams and a sound like tearing fabric. "Team 2, report!" Walters barked into the radio. "What's happening?" Static, then a panicked voice. "It got Lewis. Jesus, it just—" The transmission cut off abruptly. "All teams converge on Team 2's position," Walters ordered. "Move, now." We ran through the forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The sound of gunfire grew louder, interspersed with shouts, and that terrible, inhuman howling. When we reached Team 2's position, the scene was chaos. 2 officers were down, one clearly dead, his throat torn out. The other was Lewis, bleeding heavily from claw marks across his back, but still alive. The remaining team members had formed a defensive circle, firing into the darkness at a target that moved too quickly to track. "Where is it?" I shouted over the gunfire. "Everywhere," someone yelled back. "It's circling, picking us off." As if to prove the point, something massive crashed through the underbrush to our right, snatching another officer before disappearing back into the darkness. His screams faded to nothing within seconds. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a massacre. The creature was using the darkness and the forest to its advantage, separating us, confusing us, making us waste ammunition firing at shadows. "Fall back," Walters ordered. "Regroup at the vehicles. Move in formation. Cover each other." But it was too late for an orderly retreat. Panic had set in, and officers were breaking formation, some firing wildly into the trees, others simply running. In the chaos, I lost sight of Walters and found myself alone, separated from both teams. The radio chatter in my ear was frantic. Officers reporting positions, casualties, sightings of the creature that couldn't possibly all be accurate. Unless there was more than one. The thought hit me like a physical blow. What if this wasn't a solitary predator? What if there was a whole pack of these things, hunting together? I crouched behind a large oak, trying to get my bearings. The gunfire had become sporadic, more distant. Either my teammates had retreated successfully, or— I didn't want to consider the alternative. A twig snapped nearby, and I whirled, gun raised. Nothing but shadows and shifting leaves. Then another sound, closer, the soft scrape of claws on bark. I looked up just in time to see it descending from the branches above, mouth open in a silent snarl. Those yellow eyes locked on mine. I fired upward, the bullets tearing through its chest, but it didn't stop. It landed on me with bone-crushing force, knocking my weapon from my hand, its weight pinning me to the forest floor. Those tusked jaws opened wide, saliva dripping onto my face as it prepared to deliver the killing blow. In that moment, staring death in the face, I felt a strange calm descend over me. I'd seen the monster. I'd proven it was real. That would have to be enough. The night exploded with gunfire, louder than before, different. The heavy thump of a large-caliber rifle. The creature jerked, its head snapping back as bullet after bullet tore into its body. It rolled off me, trying to flee, but more shots came, relentless, from multiple directions. I scrambled away, looking up to see Walters and what remained of our teams, advancing in formation, firing with deadly precision. The creature made one last attempt to escape, lunging toward the trees. But a final volley of gunfire brought it down for good. It collapsed in a heap, those yellow eyes dimming, then going dark. Silence fell over the forest, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing and the metallic click of weapons being reloaded. Walters approached cautiously, his rifle trained on the fallen creature. "Is it dead?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I nodded, unable to speak. Relief and exhaustion washed over me in equal measure. It was over. The nightmare was finally over, or so I thought. As dawn broke over Becker's Ridge, we took stock of our losses. 3 officers dead, 5 injured, including Lewis, who'd need extensive surgery but would survive. The creature's body was secured and transported to a facility in Cheyenne for examination by experts from the CDC and several universities. I stood at the edge of the ravine, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful, peaceful, a stark contrast to the horrors of the night before. "Hell of a thing," Walter said, coming to stand beside me. "They're saying it might be some kind of undiscovered species, something that's been hiding in these woods for centuries, maybe." I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. There was something too deliberate about the way it had hunted us, something that went beyond animal instinct. "At least it's over," I said. Walters didn't respond immediately. Then, "Maybe, but there's something you should see." He led me back to the cave, now cordoned off with yellow police tape. Inside, a team of forensic specialists was cataloging the remains we'd found earlier. The bones, the blood, the body of the hiker. One of them approached us, holding a camera. "Sheriff Deputy," she greeted us. "We found something interesting deeper in the cave system. There's a chamber back there that appears to have been used as a nest, for lack of a better word." She showed us photos on her camera's display screen. A larger cavern, the floor covered in what looked like shredded bark and leaves, and in the center, something that made my blood run cold: eggs. 3 of them, each the size of a football, their surfaces mottled and leathery. "Are they—" I couldn't finish the question. "Viable? We don't know yet," she said. "They're being transported to a secure facility for study." Walters and I exchanged a look of pure dread. If those eggs hatched, if there were more of those creatures. As if reading my thoughts, Walters said, "We'll deal with that if it comes to it. For now, let's just be grateful we got this one." I nodded, but a nagging doubt remained. As we walked back to our vehicles, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That somewhere in these woods, something was watching, waiting. In my 12 years as a small-town cop, I'd seen some strange things. But nothing would ever compare to what happened at Becker's Ridge. And deep down, I knew that the nightmare might have only just begun. But that's a story for another time. The first thing you learn as a county sheriff's deputy in rural Black Ridge County is that isolation breeds its own kind of danger. My name is Michael Reeves. 13 years on the force and counting each gray hair as a badge, earned the hard way. Our jurisdiction covers 1,800 square miles of mostly forest, farmland, and forgotten places where cell reception dies before your headlights hit the tree line. That October night started like many others. Quiet dispatch radio, coffee gone cold, and the kind of darkness that swallows your taillights when you glance in the rear view. I was parked at the overlook on Route 16, my cruiser facing the valley where scattered lights from the town below resembled fallen stars. "Unit 47, we've got a 10. 53 on Pinewood Road, 3 miles past the old mill. Caller reports unusual circumstances. Approach with caution." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the static. Car accident, unusual circumstances. In my experience, that could mean anything from a drunk driver claiming they swerved to avoid a ghost to legitimate danger. "Copy that. Unit 47 responding. ETA 8 minutes. I flipped on my lights but kept the siren silent. Pinewood Road wound through the densest part of Black Ridge Forest, where trees pressed against the asphalt like they were trying to reclaim it. The full moon cast strange shadows across the road, branches reaching like skeletal fingers, undergrowth transforming into crouching figures. The accident scene appeared suddenly around a bend. A pickup truck had veered off the road and struck a massive pine. No other vehicles involved. My headlights illuminated a single set of skid marks leading straight into the tree. Something wasn't right about the angle. It looked deliberate. I approached with my flashlight drawn alongside my weapon. The driver's side door hung open, but there was no one inside. No blood either, which was a good sign. The keys dangled from the ignition and a cell phone sat on the dashboard, its screen cracked but still glowing with an unfinished text message. "I saw it again tonight. It's follow it." The forest seemed to go silent as I read those words. My neck prickled with a sensation I've come to recognize over years of service, the feeling of being watched. "Sheriff's Department, anyone there?" My voice echoed back at me from the trees, mocking my authority over this wild place. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. I pivoted toward the sound, light cutting through the mist that had begun pooling around my ankles. "Sir, ma'am, if you're injured, I'm here to help." 20 yards into the trees, I found a wallet. Driver's license identified the truck's owner as Robert Jenkins, 42 local address. The photo showed a weathered face with deep-set eyes that had seen things they couldn't unsee. I recognized him. He'd filed 3 reports in the last month about trespassers on his property. Each time we'd responded, we'd found nothing. Something rustled in the underbrush nearby. I swung my light toward it and caught a flash of movement, someone running deeper into the forest. "Stop! Sheriff's Department," I pursued, but whoever it was knew these woods better than I did. After 100 yards, I lost the trail at the edge of a small clearing. The moonlight carved shadows so deep they seemed to have substance. That's when I noticed the smell, like wet earth and something metallic. Blood. In the center of the clearing stood an arrangement that turned my stomach. A circle of stones with carved symbols I didn't recognize. Animal bones, deer by the look of them, formed a pattern inside the circle. And fresh blood spattered across a flat stone in the middle. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, Unit 47, I need backup at my location. Possible 1056, missing person. Vehicle owner Robert Jenkins, unaccounted for. Also need forensics. I found what appears to be some kind of ritual site." "Copy that, Unit 47. All units are currently responding to incidents. Nearest backup is 30 minutes out." 30 minutes. A lot can happen in 30 minutes. As I took photos of the scene with my department-issued camera, the wind shifted, bringing a new sound, faint rhythmic chanting from deeper in the forest. My instincts screamed to wait for backup, but something about that unfinished text message and the fresh blood kept pushing me forward. The forest grew denser as I moved toward the sound. Pine needles cushioned my footsteps, making my approach nearly silent. The chanting grew louder, 3 or 4 voices speaking words in a language I couldn't identify. I crested a small rise and found myself looking down into another clearing. 4 figures in dark clothing stood around a man bound to a tree, Robert Jenkins, his face bloody but conscious, eyes wide with terror. One of the figures held a knife that caught the moonlight as it was raised. Time slowed. I announced myself, weapon drawn. The figures scattered like startled deer, disappearing into the darkness with unnatural speed. In seconds, only Jenkins remained, slumped against his bindings. As I cut him free, his words tumbled out in a panicked rush. They said they were summoning it, said they needed my blood because I'd seen it, the shadow that walks between the trees. "Who were they, Robert? Did you recognize anyone?" His eyes, wild with fear, locked onto mine. "People from town, regular folks, but different somehow, like they were empty inside." Before I could question him further, a sound like thunder rolled through the trees, but the sky above remained clear and star-filled. Jenkins began to shake. "It's coming. The shadow is coming." I helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as we started back toward the road. Every few steps he would glance back, his terror becoming more pronounced. "They've been doing this for generations," he whispered. "Taking people who notice the shadow, feeding it. My grandfather tried to warn me, but I didn't listen." The thunder sound came again, closer this time. The ground beneath our feet vibrated. "We need to move faster," I said, half dragging him now. We broke through the tree line just as my radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, be advised, backup is 10 minutes out." Jenkins collapsed into my cruiser, and I slammed the door behind him. As I rounded to the driver's side, a movement across the road caught my attention. A figure stood at the forest's edge, tall, draped in what looked like a dark cloak. It remained perfectly still, watching. I called out, ordering the figure to show their hands. No response. Jenkins began screaming from inside the cruiser. I turned to check on him for just a second. When I looked back, the figure was gone. As I pulled away from the scene, headlights illuminating the empty road ahead, Jenkins grew quieter, slumped in the back seat. In the rearview mirror, The forest seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Something had been awakened in Black Ridge County, and I had the sinking feeling this was just the beginning. The radio chatter filled the silence as we drove back toward town. Reports coming in from all over the county. Strange sightings, livestock mutilations, people acting erratically. Whatever had been happening in those woods wasn't isolated. It was spreading, and I was right in the middle of it. I didn't go home that night. After delivering Jenkins to the hospital and giving my initial report, I returned to the station and commandeered the small conference room. By morning, its walls were covered with maps, photos, and incident reports dating back 6 months. Sheriff Donna Morris found me there at 6 a.m., staring at the pattern I'd discovered. Clusters of unusual incidents following the lunar cycle, all centered around the deepest parts of Black Ridge Forest. "You look like hell, Mike," she said, placing a fresh coffee beside my empty cup. At 54, Morris had seen everything in her 30 years of service, or so we'd thought. "Thanks, Sheriff." I gestured to the wall. "Something's happening out there. Jenkins was just the latest victim." Morris studied the map, her expression grim. "I've lived in this county my entire life. These woods have always had stories. My grandmother used to talk about the old ways that some families kept alive. You think this is some kind of cult activity?" She shrugged. "People need something to believe in, especially in places like this where hard times never seem to end. But this," she tapped a photo of the stone circle, "this is something else." The hospital called. Jenkins had stabilized and was asking for me specifically. When I arrived, he looked 10 years older than his license photo, his eyes sunken and haunted. "They'll come for me," he whispered as I sat beside his bed. "They know I've seen too much. Who are they, Robert? I need names." His laugh was hollow. "They look like everyone else, your neighbors, the cashier at the market, the mail carrier. But they serve it." "Serve what?" Jenkins leaned closer. "The shadow in the pines. It's been here since before the settlers. The native people knew to avoid these forests, but when white men came, some made a pact. I'd heard similar legends growing up here, whispered stories about deals made in the dark with forces better left undisturbed. Local folklore, nothing more. But the evidence in those woods was real. "I need something concrete, Robert. Help me stop this." His eyes darted to the window, checking the position of the sun. "There's a record. The families keep a book. My grandfather saw it once, before they tried to silence him. It lists all the offerings." "Offerings?" "People, animals, whatever it demands." He gripped my arm. "Maple Creek Cave. They use it for storage. Evidence will be there." Maple Creek Cave was well known to local teens looking for trouble, but it was on private property, land owned by the Larson family for generations. Getting a warrant wouldn't be easy without more to go on. As I stood to leave, Jenkins grabbed my wrist. "They'll be watching you now. They know when they're being hunted." "Who specifically should I be looking for?" "The mark. They all carry it." He traced a pattern on his palm, a circle with a vertical line through it. "Some hide it better than others." Back at the station, I ran background checks on the Larson family. James Larson, the current patriarch, served on the town council. His daughter, Veronica, worked as a high school biology teacher. Nothing suspicious in their records. I was about to call it a day when Deputy Keegan Alvarez knocked on my door. At 26, he was our newest hire, eager and observant. "Thought you should see this," he said, sliding a folder across my desk. "I noticed you were looking into the Larsons. These are photos from the Founders' Day celebration last summer." The images showed various townsfolk at the annual festival. Alvarez had circled certain details. James Larson's cufflinks, Veronica's necklace, Judge Howard's tie pin. All bore the same symbol Jenkins had drawn on his palm. "It could be nothing," Alvarez said. "Local jewelry design, maybe?" But we both knew it wasn't nothing. That night, without a warrant or backup, I drove to the edge of Larson property. What I was about to do could end my career, but if Jenkins was right, lives were at stake. The nearly full moon illuminated the field between the road and the tree line. Beyond that, somewhere in the forest, Maple Creek Cave waited. I moved silently through the trees, following the sound of running water. The creek was barely a trickle this time of year, making the cave entrance easier to spot. A dark mouth in a limestone outcropping. My flashlight revealed a narrow passage leading downward. The air inside was cool and damp, carrying that same metallic scent I'd detected in the forest clearing. The passage widened after 20 yards, opening into a chamber roughly the size of my living room. My light swept across the space, revealing crude shelves carved into the rock walls. The shelves held jars, dozens of them, filled with dark liquid and objects I couldn't immediately identify. Ritual tools lay carefully arranged on a stone table. Knives with bone handles, bowls carved from wood, containers of powders and dried herbs. In an alcove at the back of the chamber, a wooden chest sat padlocked and chained. I was examining it when a noise from the entrance froze me in place. Footsteps, multiple sets approaching rapidly. I killed my light and drew my weapon, pressing myself against the wall beside the entrance. 3 figures entered, carrying lanterns that cast long shadows across the cave floor. I recognized James Larson immediately. The others were Judge Howard and Dr. Brenner from the county hospital. "The cycle is almost complete," Larson was saying. "We can't afford mistakes now." "The deputy is becoming a problem," Brenner replied. "He's asking questions, connecting dots. Then we'll add him to the offering." Howard's voice was calm, as if discussing the weather. "It always prefers law enforcement. Something about the authority, the power." They moved to the chest, unlocking it to reveal a large, leather-bound book. As they opened it, I shifted position for a better view. My boot dislodged a small stone that clattered across the floor. All 3 men turned toward the sound. Caught, I stepped into the light, badge and gun clearly visible. "Sheriff's Department, you're trespassing on an active investigation." Larson's face showed no surprise, only calm acceptance. "Deputy Reeves, we've been expecting you. Your predecessor attended our gatherings before his unfortunate retirement." "This is over," I said. "Whatever you're doing stops now." The men exchanged glances, then began to laugh, a sound devoid of humor that echoed unnaturally in the cave. "Over." Howard stepped forward. "It will never be over. The compact was made centuries ago. We are merely caretakers of a tradition that sustains this town. By killing innocent people? By feeding what protects us," Brenner countered. "Why do you think Black Ridge has survived while other towns withered? Why our crops rarely fail? Why the opioid crisis barely touched us? It requires payment for its services." A deep, rumbling sound filled the cave, the same thunder I'd heard in the forest. The lantern flames flickered violently. "It knows you're here," Larson said, smiling. "It's honored. Law enforcement officers have always made the finest offerings." I backed toward the entrance, weapon trained on the 3 men. "You're all under arrest." "No, Deputy Reeves," Howard said softly. "You're already caught." The darkness behind me shifted, solidified. Something cold wrapped around my ankle. I fired a shot into the blackness and ran, ducking into the narrow passage. Behind me, the thunder sound grew louder, punctuated by the men's rhythmic chanting. I burst from the cave into the moonlight, running full tilt through the trees. The forest seemed alive around me, branches reaching, roots lifting to trip my feet. I fell once, twice, but kept moving, the sound of pursuit never far behind. When I finally reached my cruiser, my hands shook so badly I could barely insert the key. As I pulled onto the road, my headlights swept across a figure standing at the forest's edge, the same cloaked silhouette I'd seen the night before. In the rearview mirror, I watched it step onto the road and begin to follow, its movement too smooth, too fast for anything human. Back at the station, I found Alvarez waiting with concern etched on his face. "You need to see this," he said, leading me to the interview room. Robert Jenkins sat handcuffed to the table, but something was wrong. His eyes were vacant, his expression slack. When he spoke, the voice wasn't his. "We missed you at the gathering, Deputy," Jenkins said, head tilting unnaturally. "The others are waiting for you to join us." Alvarez's hand moved to his weapon. "He walked in here 20 minutes ago, asked for you, started saying crazy things." "What things?" "That the shadow was coming for the town, that you were marked as its next meal." Alvarez lowered his voice. "Mike, what the hell is going on?" I stared at Jenkins, who smiled with too many teeth. "How many people in this department carry that mark?" I asked quietly. Alvarez's expression hardened. "Too many. Sheriff Morris included." Outside, the thunder sound rolled across the sky. Jenkins began to laugh. The long night was just beginning. Morning arrived with a heavy fog that clung to Blackridge like a burial shroud. I hadn't slept, spending the night barricaded in the evidence room with Alvarez and a sedated Jenkins, who occasionally murmured phrases in that unknown language I'd heard in the forest. "We need to get him out of town," Alvarez said, checking his weapon for the third time in an hour. "And we need help." "Who can we trust?" I scrolled through my contacts, crossing off names of colleagues who might belong to whatever this was: cult, secret society, or worse. "My grandmother," Alvarez suggested. "She lives on the reservation just outside county lines. If anyone knows about this shadow thing, it would be the tribal elders." It was our only lead. We loaded Jenkins into my personal vehicle, rather than a cruiser, less conspicuous, and took back roads out of town. The fog limited visibility to a few yards ahead, transforming familiar landscapes into ghostly, unrecognizable terrain. Jenkins stirred in the back seat. "They're following," he mumbled, pressing his face to the window. "Always following." I checked my mirrors and saw nothing but swirling mist. "How long has this been happening, Robert? How long have you known?" His laughter was dry and brittle. "My whole life. My grandfather showed me the signs when I was 10, told me which families were involved, which woods to avoid on certain nights." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "I should have left this place years ago." "Why didn't you?" He lowered his hands, his expression suddenly lucid. "Because it doesn't let marked ones leave. I tried 3 times. Car accidents, sudden illness, freak storms. It always drove me back." The reservation appeared through the fog, a collection of modern homes mixed with traditional structures on sovereign land just beyond county jurisdiction. Alvarez directed me to a modest house set apart from the others. Eleanor Alvarez was a small woman with shrewd eyes and silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She showed no surprise at our arrival, as if she'd been expecting us. "Keegan said you've seen the shadow," she said, as she served us coffee at her kitchen table. Jenkins remained in the car, sedated again after becoming agitated. "Not exactly," I replied, "but I've seen what it makes people do." Eleanor nodded. "The Blackridge Pact. Our people have known about it for generations. When the settlers came, they struggled to survive these harsh winters. Some made a deal with something that already lived in these forests." "What is it?" Alvarez asked. "We have a name for it that shouldn't be spoken." She traced the same circle and line symbol in the condensation on her coffee mug. "It feeds on fear, pain, and power. The settlers offered it sacrifices in exchange for protection and prosperity." "But what is it?" I pressed. "Some kind of predator? A man?" Eleanor's eyes met mine. "Neither. Both. It walks between worlds, drawn by belief and fed by blood. The more people fear it and believe in it, the stronger it becomes. How do we stop it?" "You don't." Her voice was flat. "You can only break the pact that binds it to Blackridge. Without human servants, it would eventually lose interest, move on." She explained that the book I'd seen in the cave contained the original pact, signed in blood by Blackridge's founding families. As long as it existed, the shadow would remain bound to the town and its servants. "Destroy the book and you might break the cycle," she said. "But those families won't give it up easily. They've enjoyed the shadow's protection for too long." As Eleanor spoke, I noticed Alvarez growing increasingly agitated, checking his phone repeatedly. "What is it?" I asked. "Messages from the station, multiple disappearances reported overnight, and Sheriff Morris is looking for us, says it's urgent." A chill ran through me. "We can't go back." "You have to," Eleanor said firmly. "The lunar cycle peaks tonight. If they're gathering sacrifices, it means the shadow will fully manifest." "And do what?" "Feed, renew the pact, grow stronger." She stood, moving to an old trunk in the corner of the room. From it, she retrieved a small leather pouch. "Take this. It won't stop the shadow, but it might slow its servants long enough for you to reach the book." Back in the car, with Jenkins mumbling restlessly in the back seat, Alvarez examined the pouch's contents, a mixture of herbs and powders, along with a small stone carving. "My grandmother's never been wrong about these things," he said quietly. "If she says we can break the pact, I believe her." I started the engine. "Then we go back. Tonight. The return drive was tense, fog still clinging to the low places. We skirted the town, using logging roads to approach the Larson property from the opposite direction. The plan was simple but dangerous. Wait until the gathering began, then move in while they were distracted with their ritual. We left Jenkins secured in the car with enough sedative to keep him quiet. Dusk was falling as we made our approach through the forest, moving toward the distant sound of voices. The clearing was larger than the one I'd found days earlier. At least 30 people gathered there, faces I recognized from town. Sheriff Morris stood among them, wearing ceremonial robes alongside James Larson. In the center of the clearing, a stone altar had been erected, and upon it lay the book from the cave. Behind the altar, something darker than the gathering night seemed to pulse and shift, a tear in reality through which something was emerging. The shadow. Alvarez clutched the pouch his grandmother had given us. "We need to get to that book." A scream cut through the chanting. A woman being dragged toward the altar. With shock, I recognized Dr. Brenner's nurse, struggling against her captors. "They're starting," I whispered. "We move now." We circled to approach from behind the altar, using the trees for cover. Alvarez sprinkled the powder from his grandmother's pouch in a line between us and the gathering. The chanting grew louder, the shadow behind the altar solidifying, taking a vaguely humanoid shape that towered over the cultists. When the nurse was forced onto the altar, I gave the signal. Alvarez struck a match and dropped it onto the powder line. It ignited instantly, creating a wall of blue-white flame that caused the cultists to fall back in confusion. I sprinted for the altar, focused entirely on the book. The nurse scrambled away as I reached for the ancient tome. Just as my fingers touched its leather binding, Sheriff Morris appeared from the smoke, her service weapon aimed at my chest. "Don't do this, Mike," she said. "You don't understand what you're interfering with." "I understand enough." I kept my hand on the book. "This ends tonight. The shadow has protected this town for generations. Without it, we're nothing." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Step away from the altar." The shadow loomed behind her, its form now distinct enough to make out a face, or rather, many faces, shifting and merging. Some I recognized as missing persons from our county files. "Look at what you're serving, Donna," I said, nodding toward the monstrosity. "Look at what it really is." For a moment, doubt flickered across her features. She half-turned, and in that instant I lunged, tackling her to the ground. Her weapon discharged harmlessly into the air. The shot triggered chaos. Cultists rushed toward us as Alvarez reached the altar. He grabbed the book, holding it high. "Stop!" he shouted, "or I destroy it right now." The entire clearing went silent. Even the shadow seemed to pause, its amorphous form rippling with what might have been concern. James Larson stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. "You don't understand what you're doing. That book is our heritage, our protection." "It's a death sentence for innocent people," Alvarez replied. The shadow pulsed, expanding. Tendrils of darkness reached toward Alvarez, who began reciting words his grandmother had taught him, an ancient protection chant in his tribal language. I struggled with Morris, finally subduing her enough to secure her with handcuffs. All around us, cultists began to advance, despite Alvarez's threat to the book. "Now!" I shouted. Alvarez pulled out a lighter and set flame to the book's ancient pages. They caught immediately, the fire unnaturally bright against the gathering darkness. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard, part scream, part thunderclap, tore through the clearing. The shadow convulsed, its form distorting. The cultists dropped to their knees, many clutching their heads in pain. As the book burned, the shadow began to dissolve, tatters of darkness peeling away like smoke in a strong wind. For a moment I saw faces within it, decades of victims staring out before fading away. Wind whipped through the trees, carrying embers from the burning book high into the night sky. The cultists began to scatter, their connection to their master severed. Only Larson remained, watching with tears streaming down his face as generations of dark covenant turned to ash. "What have you done?" he whispered. "It will come back. And when it does, it will be hungry." The shadow gave one final silent scream before collapsing into nothing, leaving only the night and the dying flames of the book. In the sudden stillness, Alvarez met my eyes across the altar. Is it over? I looked at Morris, who lay on the ground, her expression one of loss and confusion. For now. But as we led our prisoners back through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that Larson might be right. We hadn't destroyed the shadow, only its connection to Blackridge. Somewhere it was still out there, seeking new believers, new servants, and I would be watching for its return. Winter came early to Blackridge County that year. The first snow fell in November, burying the forest clearing where we'd broken the pact. I visited once, finding only scorched earth where the altar had stood. No sign remained of the shadow or its servants. The investigation officially concluded 3 weeks after that night. 27 arrests, including Sheriff Morris, James Larson, and half the town council. The FBI took over, cataloging evidence that linked the cult to decades of disappearances across 3 states. I was offered the sheriff's position, but declined. Some wounds run too deep, some knowledge weighs too heavy. Instead, I requested transfer to a detective role, focusing on cold cases, particularly those that had been suspiciously closed under previous administrations. Alvarez was promoted to deputy sheriff under the new leadership. He'd earned it, showing courage few possess when facing things beyond understanding. We still met weekly for coffee, comparing notes on unusual reports, keeping vigilant. Jenkins recovered physically but never mentally. The psychiatric facility in the next county became his home. I visited monthly, listening to his increasingly coherent warnings about the shadow's inevitable return. Sometimes, in his more lucid moments, he would share folklore passed down through his family, stories that helped me better understand what we'd faced. It finds a way back, he told me during my December visit. Always has, always will. It just needs one believer, one servant to invite it. I believed him. The shadow had fed on Blackridge for generations. Such hunger doesn't simply disappear. My apartment became a research center, walls covered with maps, historical accounts, similar cases from across the country. Patterns emerged, small towns with unusual prosperity despite economic downturns, clusters of disappearances following lunar cycles, folklore about protective spirits demanding sacrifice. Eleanor Alvarez became an invaluable resource, translating old tribal records that referenced similar entities throughout history. They have many names, she explained during one of our consultations, but they're all branches of the same darkness. On the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, I received a call from Alvarez, his voice tight with tension. You need to come to the station, now. I found him in the evidence room, standing over an open box of items confiscated from Larson's home. Inside lay a small book I hadn't seen before. Not the covenant we'd burned, but something older, written in a language I didn't recognize. Where did this come from? I asked, careful not to touch it. Evidence log says it was found in a hidden floor safe. FBI cataloged it, but left it when they concluded their investigation. He pointed to a page marked with a red ribbon. Look at this. The illustration showed the now familiar shadow figure, but beside it was another image, a dormant form, waiting beneath the earth. My grandmother translated some of it, Alvarez said quietly. It's not just one entity, it's 2, twins. We destroyed the connection to one, but the other. Cold realization washed over me. It's still here. That night we drove to the cave where I'd first discovered their ritual items. The entrance appeared undisturbed, sealed with police tape that had collected ice in the winter air. Inside, everything remained as the FBI had left it, shelves emptied of their gruesome contents, floor marked with evidence tags. But something felt different. The air pressure, perhaps, or a subtle vibration in the stone beneath our feet. Alvarez ran his flashlight along the walls, revealing symbols we'd missed before, ancient carvings partially hidden by centuries of mineral deposits. It's a map, he said, tracing the pattern with his finger. These lines match the ley lines my grandmother talked about, energy paths running through the county. The carvings converged at a single point deep in the Blackridge forest, an area so remote it wasn't even accessible by the logging roads. What's there? I asked. Nothing, according to any map. But these symbols, he pointed to markings around the convergence point, My grandmother would say they represent a doorway or a prison. We spent the rest of the night planning, gathering supplies, studying Eleanor's translations of the small book. According to the text, the shadow entities were bound to our world centuries before European settlers arrived. One fed on fear, the other on devotion. The pact we'd destroyed had empowered the fear eater, but its twin remained dormant, waiting. The winter solstice is when the barrier between their world and ours is thinnest, Alvarez explained as we loaded our gear 3 days later. If there's any movement, it would be tonight. The forest in deep winter was an alien landscape, snow-laden branches creating tunnels of white, our breath crystallizing in the bitter cold. We followed game trails that gradually disappeared, relying on GPS coordinates extrapolated from the cave carvings. After 4 hours of difficult hiking, we reached a small valley nestled between steep ridges. At its center stood a circle of stones similar to the ritual sites we'd found before, but larger, more ancient. Snow had been recently cleared from its surface. "Someone's been here," I whispered, drawing my weapon. We approached cautiously, scanning the tree line for movement. The stone circle contained carvings similar to those in the cave, spiraling patterns that seemed to pull at the eye, creating the illusion of depth where none existed. Alvarez knelt, brushing away fresh snow to reveal a dark stain on the central stone. Blood. Recent. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind us. We spun toward the sound, weapons raised. "Sheriff's Department, show yourself." The figure that emerged from the trees was the last person I expected. Dr. Brenner, his hospital badge still clipped to his coat. His eyes had the same vacant expression I'd seen in Jenkins before he was sedated. "You're too late," he said, his voice oddly flat. "The awakening has begun." Before we could question him, he collapsed face first into the snow. Behind him stood Eleanor Alvarez, a bloodied rock in her hand. "Grandmother?" Alvarez lowered his weapon in confusion. "Not your grandmother anymore," she replied with a smile that stretched too wide across her face. "She served her purpose, leading you here." The realization hit like a physical blow. We'd been manipulated from the start. "The second shadow," I said. "It was working through you." Her laughter echoed unnaturally across the valley. "So clever, Deputy Reeves. While you focused on the fear eater, you ignored its twin, the one that feeds on belief, on devotion." The ground beneath the stone circle began to tremble. Cracks appeared, spreading outward like a spiderweb. "You didn't break the pact," she continued, her voice distorting. "You only changed its terms. Fear is temporary, but devotion—" Her eyes turned completely black. "Devotion is eternal." Alvarez raised his weapon again, aiming at the thing wearing his grandmother's form. "Where is she? What have you done with her?" "She's here. They're all here." She tapped her temple. "Every servant carries a piece of us inside. Your grandmother understood that better than most. She's been mine for decades." The rumbling intensified. From the cracks in the stone circle, darkness began to seep like oil, not the smoky shadow we'd faced before, but something more substantial, more ancient. I fired a warning shot into the air. "Whatever's happening, it stops now." "It cannot be stopped," she replied calmly. "The cycle must continue. One shadow recedes, the other rises. Balance is maintained." The darkness continued to pool in the center of the circle, forming a shape that resembled a hand reaching upward. The air grew thick with the scent of wet earth and decay. "Run," I told Alvarez, backing away. "Get back up. I'll hold position." He hesitated, torn between duty and family. "That thing isn't my grandmother anymore." "I know. Go." As Alvarez disappeared into the trees, I kept my weapon trained on Eleanor, who made no move to follow. She simply watched the darkness grow, her expression one of reverent anticipation. "What do you want?" I demanded. "Why Blackridge?" "Small towns have such concentrated belief," she replied, "such devotion to tradition, to family, to the land. It makes the bond stronger." She gestured to the emerging shadow hand. "This one doesn't need sacrifices like its brother. It feeds on worship, on service freely given." "Nobody would willingly serve that thing." Her smile widened. "They already do. Every prayer unanswered by other gods finds its way here. Every desperate wish made in darkness. Every secret devotion to power and security." The hand had fully emerged now, fingers longer than humanly possible, reaching toward the night sky. Behind it, something massive shifted beneath the earth, straining against ancient bindings. Eleanor stepped into the circle, arms outstretched. It's been waiting so long, gathering strength while its brother fed openly. I aimed at her center mass, stepped back from the circle. You still don't understand. She turned to face me, her features beginning to blur and shift. You cannot kill devotion with bullets, Deputy. It lives in the heart. The hand suddenly lunged, closing around Eleanor. She made no sound as darkness enveloped her, her body seeming to dissolve into the growing shadow. What rose from the circle no longer resembled a hand, but a towering figure composed of countless flowing forms, human shapes swimming within its mass like fish in dark water. I fired, the bullets passing harmlessly through the entity. It turned what might have been a face toward me, a swirling void containing thousands of eyes, all blinking independently. My radio crackled with Alvarez's voice. Mike, get out of there! Backup is 20 minutes out! But I couldn't move. Not because of fear, but because I understood now what we were facing. This wasn't some ancient evil to be defeated with weapons or fire. It was the collective shadow of human devotion, every dark prayer, every desperate bargain, every sacrifice made in the name of protection. The entity extended what might have been an arm, reaching toward me. Where the fear-eater had inspired terror, this one offered peace, understanding, acceptance. I felt my resolve weakening as it touched my thoughts. Serve and be served, protect and be protected, give and receive. Its voice wasn't audible but felt, resonating directly in my mind. Images flashed before me, Blackridge safe and prosperous, my career advancing, all the cases solved, all the mysteries unraveled. All it asked was devotion. My finger tightened on the trigger, not aiming at the shadow but at myself. If it needed a vessel, needed a devoted servant to fully manifest, I would deny it. Better to die than become what Morris and Larson had been. The shadow seemed to sense my intention. It recoiled slightly, the peaceful sensation replaced by something colder, not anger but disappointment. The ground ceased its rumbling. Another time then. There are always others. The entity began to recede, sinking back into the cracked stone circle. As it disappeared, the pieces of broken stone drew together, sealing the opening. Within seconds, only the circle remained, covered once more by gently falling snow. I stood alone in the clearing, weapons still raised, body trembling from adrenaline and cold. What had just happened? Had I imagined the voice, the visions? Had it really retreated or simply changed tactics? Alvarez found me there 10 minutes later, still staring at the now ordinary stone circle. Backup's on the way, he said, scanning the area. Where's my grandmother? I couldn't bring myself to tell him the full truth. She's gone. The shadow took her. His face hardened with grief and determination. Then we'll get her back. But I knew we wouldn't. Whatever had worn Eleanor's form wasn't something that could be rescued or redeemed. It was a servant that had become part of its master, consumed by the very devotion it had offered. As we hiked back toward civilization, emergency lights visible in the distance, I realized with grim certainty that our fight wasn't over. We had faced one shadow and survived, only to discover a deeper, more insidious threat. The fear-eater had been obvious in its hunger, its methods clear and brutal. But this twin, this shadow of devotion, worked through willing hearts, through genuine belief. How do you fight something that offers exactly what people want most? Security, understanding, belonging. I glanced back at the valley one last time before it disappeared from view. Fresh snow had already covered our tracks, returning the landscape to pristine whiteness. But beneath that innocent surface, something waited, patient, eternal. And someday it would find another servant, another voice to speak its promises, another heart willing to offer the devotion it craved. Until then, I would be watching, and wondering if, when the time came, I would be strong enough to resist its call. Because in Blackridge County, the true danger isn't what lurks in the darkness, it's what the darkness offers.